Okay, I'd like to call this meeting of the Town of Rhinebeck Planning Board to order. We have a few modifications in tonight's agenda, which I will quickly go over.
Excuse me a second.
Yes, sir.
Could we hold the conversation down so we can have our meeting? Thank you.
It's missing on the agenda under our public hearing. We have already opened the public hearing on Hudson Solar this evening, and we will be continuing it to our next meeting in June, but we will be opening that tonight. And the regular session, new business, the application by Elise Long will not take place this evening, as we don't have that material at this point in time. Other than that, I think that's pretty much, the agenda stands as published. What I'd like to do is get a motion to approve the final version of Art's meeting notes.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Very good. And I believe we have had the April 2 and 16 minutes to review. I trust you've all reviewed them?
I was going to review that.
Uh-oh. So we're going to wait on those. Yes, that's my mistake. Correspondence and announcements. As I think we all know, our planner for 33 years, Art Broad, has stepped down. And although he's continuing to help us with some major projects, but he's been 50 years in the business and 33 years as the town of Rhinebeck's planning consultant. So it's a tremendous loss for us. He's also a very good friend. So it is a loss. This morning, the town board established a search committee for a replacement for Art, and the people they chose to put on it are myself, Melody, and Woody, and Brennan Carney, who will be the board member of that. What we're going to be doing is putting an RFP, and then we're going to go through, hopefully, all the applications that we get and winnow it down to 2 or 3 people, at which point the planning board will be meeting an executive session to interview those 2 or 3 people to make a recommendation to the town board as to who will be the town's next planning consultant. So that will be coming up. I don't think I have anything else. Does anyone else have any announcements? Okay, one thing we can discuss, we were talking about setting another meeting in May for dealing with a couple of other large projects that want to come and just tell us what they're doing, or proposing to do. They aren't applications at this point. We're not going to do it on the 3rd Monday because that's my anniversary. My wife told me we're not going to do that on the 3rd Monday. So we need to have another, just sort of think during the meeting, and maybe we'll set up a second meeting later this evening if we can sort of decide when we might be free, might be able to do something like that. So at this point, we will wait for our first public.
We have some referrals.
Oh, we do, don't we?
We do.
In the ZBA. Okay, the first one is John Rutgerson. What he's proposing to do is to put up a barn on his property. He's the one who has that little farm just south of the village, sort of across from what used to be Hobson's. And he wants to put up a small barn on that property to store his equipment in, so he can sort of clean the place up. And he requires a variance because it's going to be very close to a residential building lot, and it has to be at least 5 feet. And so he's asked for a variance from the ZBA to do that. And the second one is, I think Art looked at this, and I think I looked at it, it didn't seem to be a problem. Dunja von Stoddard is an area variance, and that one I am not familiar with.
Dunja von Stoddard is the one that's been before us a couple of times. She put in the art studio. And then this has to do with wanting to put up a garage, and it's close to a wetland. Yes.
And are they, but we don't have a permit before, I guess they're looking for a variance?
She needs a variance to get put the site the garage where she wants it.
And so is it within the buffer of the wetland? So then she'll be coming before the planning board for a wetland, but she wants to go first. Okay. So I think the area variance is from the setback standpoint as opposed to the other location. Okay. And I'm trying to find where I have Charles Freeney, the other one down on Millwood.
Is Franny the pool house, Franny is the pool house,
Okay, yes.
that we thought didn't.
Right, that's the one that does not need to come before the
Mics
planning.
a little bit,
I'm sorry?
the mics aren't being very effective up there.
Is this better? A little better? Okay. Okay, if it feeds back. We met with Charles Franny, who does not need to come before the planning board, but he's putting the pool house a little closer, I think, the side yard than meets the area requirement for that property, so we need one area variance for that. In none of these cases, Art looked at them, and I looked at the first and the third one, and now thank you for reminding me about the second one. There seem to be any zoning or planning issues involved with those. The Van Stoddard one will be coming before the planning board for a wetland permit. So, what we have here,
Well, no, if you look at note 3, under Art's draft comments and recommendations, it
it
says,
mentions that they
it
both have
does
to
note
come
that
before us.
Rutgerson and Van Stoddard are matters which involve, in addition to the requested relief, site plan approvals and the issuance of special use permit. So that confirms what you just said.
So basically, I think this is one of those cases in which we're going to say that we find that these three requests of the ZBA present no planning issues, no planning problems, and we recommend that the ZBA first listen to the neighbors, any concerns raised at their public hearings, and use their own good judgment and whether or not to grant these variances being requested.
Let's go back to the first one, on 9. Is that property zoned, or is that property agriculturally
Yes,
zoned?
it is in the Ag 20 district now.
Is the structure, the house and the land that's not being worked right now considered agricultural?
It's all, he got all of it in Ag 20, yeah. It's all in Ag 20. And that's why the barn he wants to put up as being an ag barn falls under the ag exemption in terms of having to go before the planning board for special use permit, given the proximity to various residential areas around it. But it still does need the one area variance. The one exemption you don't get is you do have to have a setback from a residential property line. And the barn can be within 5 feet of the residential property line. The fact that it's his residence doesn't matter, it still needs to have a variance. So,
And he doesn't intend to combine the properties?
apparently not, I've spoken with him about it, he apparently doesn't wish to at this point. At some point he may work his advantage, but at this point he doesn't wish to do that.
All right.
So he's not going to do it. Could I hear a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
And I really hope Gretchen got all that down, because I forgot what I said. All in favor? Very good, thank you. All right, our first public hearing. Okay. This is Michael Finder and Andrea Novak, and this is special use permit and site plan conducted combined special public hearing on the application of Michael Finder and Andrea Novak for special use permit and site plan review and approval to authorize a proposed 20.1 kilowatt ground-mounted solar installation comprised of 1,080 square feet of panel accessory to a single-family dwelling on a 19.9 acre parcel within the rural countryside zoning district, with the proposed action being classified as a type 2 action under seeker. Okay.
Issue of notification
I
in the newspaper.
don't, I think we're okay.
Is this the one that? Yes.
Is
This
this
is the one that the Freeman did not, correct?
Yes,
Okay, so we're left
and
with...
he's not here.
And he's not here? Okay. What I think I'd like to do, that he
To
did...
be clear, the notification was
Right.
sent to the Freeman, put in the newspaper, and the Freeman neglected to
Publish it.
publish it.
He did do all the
It's not the
circulation.
applicant's problem. They
Right.
did what they were supposed to do, but the newspaper did not publish.
And so
Seems to be a
technically...
somewhat common problem with that publication.
Yes, it is. And I think from that standpoint, since it didn't, we need to continue this public hearing to June 4th
And republish it.
and republish. I don't think we need to have him re-certification. He'll just have to sign out there for a long time in front of his property, so,
Keep the sign out,
yeah.
just do the paper.
So could I hear a motion to continue this public hearing? June 4th is our next meeting?
Yes, unless you
June 4th?
schedule another meeting.
Okay, well, we'll do this one June 4th at 6:35.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. And as luck would have it, we're right up in time for our next public hearing. Okay. Anne-Marie Gonzalez, 18 and 24 Pell's Road, subdivision plat approval. Conduct a public hearing on the application by Anne-Marie Gonzalez for subdivision plat approval under Town Code Chapter 101, subdivision of land, authorize the proposed .206 acre lot line alteration between a .531 acre parcel and a 1.21 acre parcel at 18 and 24 Pell's Road within the rural countryside RC5 zoning district and located within 500 feet of the Dutchess County Agricultural District 20 as subject of related area variances granted by the ZBA on November 15, 2017, with the proposed action having been classified as an unlisted action under seeker. Okay, who's here to represent the applicant?
We just saw him.
He was out in the lobby the whole way, so he's around.
I will see if I can round him up.
Mr.
I'm sorry,
Gonzalez.
what did you ask?
I'm looking for Mr. Gonzalez, the applicant for...
Oh, I'm a neighbor.
Oh, okay. Would you like to represent Mr. Gonzalez at this evening's proceedings and explain exactly what you're going to do?
I'm sorry. I'm having a really hard time hearing you.
I'm sorry, yeah. I will try to do better.
It's partly me, it's partly me.
Oh, you are? Okay. You're on. What do you want to do?
I'm trying to reposition the property line, take a little bit more from 18 pals for 24 pals, to 24, for 24 pals. Survey, I got already some variances from the zoning board, so I'm just trying to get your approval here.
We have,
Did you own both those properties?
Yes.
It was a very fractional amount of property moving between one property and the
Yeah.
other, right?
Yeah, not significantly much. Just a bit.
let's see, we have the CAB as a report.
Good evening, Robert Donaldson, Conservation Advisory Board. The member of the CAB who was at that site visit brought up the property at his last week's meeting and said there was no issues or no concerns that the CAB found with the subdivision of the property.
Thank you. And I did the site visit, and I certainly concur. It's a very simple, very minor little lot line adjustment, and I don't see any issues with it whatsoever. Any here from the public who would like to comment on this application?
So we're still talking about the line that was
Yeah,
surveyed?
it's just the same line that you guys.
The
were here
survey,
for.
right?
Yeah.
How much area is involved in this change?
It is,
I remember it top of my head.
I have it right here. It is, let me see, a .206 acre lot line alteration.
On how many acres?
One of the lots is .531 and the other is 1.218.
And they're making them more even than yours.
It basically, as I recall, it was to accommodate, I think, a septic system, a certain,
We have, my kids have a play structure. I have a little garden. So when my father-in-law was living next door, everything was like open. So there was no separation. So now he's been dead for about 3 or 4 years now. So we wanted to move it over, take a little, accommodate if we were to sell the property next door, for my kids to still have the play structure and for me to have a garden.
other questions from the planning board?
No.
Hearing none, I have a draft approval resolution. The Town of Rhinebeck Planning Board hereby acts as follows on the application by Anne-Marie Gonzalez for subdivision plat approval under Town Code Chapter 101. Let me see, subject of related area variances granted by the ZBA through its decision on case number 945 on November 15, 2017, and as depicted or otherwise described within the application and supporting documents, including the surveyor's map entitled Lot Line Adjustment, Lands of Gonzalez, prepared and stamped by John H. Decker, LS, dated August 15, 2016, and revised October 5th, 2017, a short AEF Part 1 and an agricultural data statement. One, we reaffirm the planning board's classification of the proposed subdivision as a minor subdivision lot line alteration. We further affirm the planning board's classification of the proposed action as a type 2 action under seeker, for which further environmental quality review is precluded. We approve the application for subdivision plat approval and authorize the chair to stamp and sign the surveyor's map upon the applicant's satisfaction of each of the below conditions and the requirements within the next 180 calendar days. A, submission of subdivision plat drawings bearing all required stamps and certifications in the number set forth within Town Code Chapter 101, Section 101-4.4B, or as may be reduced to a lesser number by the chair in consideration of record, filing, and distribution requirements. Payment of any outstanding fees and or reimbursable amounts due to the town of Rhinebeck related to review and processing of the application subject to this resolution. In taking this action, the planning board knows that there are neither new lots or building sites being created. The application is therefore neither subject to the provisions of Town Code Chapter 101, subdivision of land concerning set-aside or recreational lands for alternative cash payment, and not the provisions of Town Code Chapter 125 zoning concerning creation of affordable housing or payment of alternative fees. Could I hear a motion to approve?
Moved.
A second.
Second.
Any more further discussion? I'll poll the board. Eric?
Aye.
Melody? Woody?
Aye.
Sharon?
Aye.
And I vote aye. So you just have to get that final drawing in, and Gretchen can tell you exactly what you need to provide, so that you can sign and you're good to go.
Okay. Thank you.
And we're going to keep you here for 5 hours like we did the last time.
And, well, we don't have cookies tonight, so we,
No, right.
that just wasn't right.
The kids are not here.
Exactly, so we weren't going to do that. All right, our next public hearing. Ronald Rhinebeck, 14 Hidden Valley Road, site plan approved. Conduct a public hearing on the application by Ronald Rhinebeck for site plan review and approval under Town Code Chapter 125 zoning, authorized replacement of a mobile home on Lot 20 within the 3.3 acre Hidden Valley Mobile Home Park located at 14 Hidden Valley Road within the neighborhood residential zoning district, the town's LWRA, and further within 500 feet of Dutchess County Ag District 20, with the proposed action having been classified as a type 2 action under seeker. Take it away.
Thank you. Well, we summarize what I'm trying to do, will be doing, and there's a small mobile home park on Old Post Road. The private road coming in is Hidden Valley Road, and on Lot 20, I wish to replace a home that is now removed from the site. It's a home that will be attached to the existing sewer system, existing water supply. There will be no changes in size. There will be a change in physical size of the home, but it'll be a 2-bedroom home, as was the one that was removed. So, in essence, it continues as is. The new home will be brand new, meet all current codes for thermal efficiency and egress and all the other safety features. The home that was there was a lot older than that. It will be installed and attached to the site on a concrete pad as per all the state codes now, and as drawn up on these plans by the engineer Pat Prendergast for the project. That's all I have.
Didn't we do this already?
This is another one. That was on, this is across the street.
Ah.
There you go. Okay, CAB.
Teresa Velarde did the site visit at this site, and she reports that the WAC has no concerns with the environmental impact or the intended work as proposed, and sees no contradictions to the policies within the town's LWRP.
I did the site visit, and as I did the other one, and certainly I see no issues, no problems with this whatsoever. It's mobile home parks often get a certain reputation. This is an extraordinary, very nice park. It's a very nice. If we're living in a situation like this, it's a really, you do a really nice job there. So, and it does provide affordable housing, which is hard to come by in this town. So it's a very good little area for people in this community.
Is a new unit a mobile home or a manufactured home?
Manufactured home.
Manufactured home, okay.
What's the delineation, what's the difference between the two?
Well, the difference is the mobile home is a mobile home. Mr. Plenbeck can probably explain it to you in better detail than I, but a mobile home is the sort of traditional type of unit that you're used to, which is on wheels. A manufactured home is something that's closer to a stick-built home that's built to the dimensions of a mobile home site.
I'll correct that if I may.
Yeah,
Mobile home designations for anything prior to 1973.
okay.
Since then, the codes have changed. It still comes with on wheels. The wheels come off, and it gets set up on it gets set up on a concrete pad.
Okay.
And
Do you get a title to that? It's no longer under
That's
DMV,
correct.
is it?
Still you get a title for that.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, and they're installed by certified installers now. You just can't bring one in and put it wherever you want.
You have to.
But there is a distinction, as we discussed, and the resolution should discuss it as a manufactured home rather than a mobile home.
Very good. Other comments from the public on this one? Anyone on the planning board? All right, well, let me proceed with the resolution. The Town of Rhinebeck Planning Board hereby acts as follows on the application by Ronald Plenbeck for site plan review and approval under Town Code Chapter 125 zoning to authorize replacement of a manufactured home on lot 20 within a 3.3 acre Hidden Valley Home Park Mobile Park located within the neighborhood residential zoning district in the town's LWRA. 1, we reaffirm the planning board's classification of the proposed action as a type 2 action under seeker for which further environmental quality review is precluded. 2, consideration of the limited work proposed accepts the above cited site plan as adequate, thus waiving submission of any additional information which might be construed as to be required on consideration of the site plan checklist set forth in section 125-75-C of the zoning law. We approve the application for site plan review and approval and authorize the chair to stamp and sign the site plan upon the applicant's satisfaction of each of the below conditions and requirements within the next 180 calendar days. A, submission of an above cited drawing in the number specified in Town Code Chapter 125, Section 125-78B, except as may be modified to a lesser known by the chair in consideration of record filing and distribution requirements, and including thereon all required stamps, seals, and certifications. B, payment of any outstanding fees and or reimbursable amounts due to the Town of Rhinebeck related to the review and processing of the application subject to this resolution. In taking this action, the planning board further authorizes the town zoning administrator and or building inspector, following receipt of the above cited drawing stamped and signed by the chair, to issue first a building permit and subsequently a certificate of occupancy use for the proposed manufactured home, single-family dwelling, upon determination both the terms of this resolution and all applicable codes, laws, rules, regulations, including but not limited to provisions of the New York State Uniform 5 Prevention and Building Code, within the purview of the zoning administrator and or building inspector has been satisfied. Could I hear a motion to approve?
So moved.
Could I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? I'll pull the board. Eric?
Aye.
Melody?
Aye.
Woody?
Aye.
Sharon? And I will vote aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't want to say this out loud, but we're sort of keeping on schedule. Alrighty. The next public hearing is Joel Herb and Susan Huckbaum, 443 Mill Road, special use permit and site plan approval, conduct of combined public hearing on the applications by Joel Herb and Susan Huckbaum for special use permit under Town Code Chapter 125 zoning, sections 12540 and 12545, and site plan review and approval under section 125-73A and B in the matter of Lansman Keel Stream Bank stabilization and construction of a 1,370 square foot single-family dwelling with attached garage on a 10.02 acre parcel at 443 Mill Road in the Rural Agricultural RA10 zoning district, the town's LWRA, and the Hudson River National Historic Landmarks District, and further within 500 feet of a Dutchess County Agricultural District 20 property. The entirety of the proposed action has been reclassified as an unlisted action under seeker.
Okay, I am Joel, not Susan. And we're here to get a site plan approval for a conforming two-bedroom house that meets all the setbacks and height limitations. It's already been reviewed by Larissa, the zoning officer. And we're also here for a stream bank stabilization at the southern edge of our property where the dam has breached and we need to repair the stream bank. During the initial consultations with the planning board members, was brought to our attention that we needed to install a turnout halfway down our drive so that emergency vehicles would be able to get back and forth. And so the code says it has to be at least 50 feet long and 20 feet wide in total after the widening. So it'll be right here. So that also conforms to all the code. 350 feet from the turnout to the house and 255 feet from the turnout to Mill Road. Sharon, you had some questions about the septic system. I brought the county approval letter if you want to see that. I can do it too. And silt fencing was all designed by our engineer for the septic system. And we'll do similar silt fencing when we do the stream bank construction to protect erosion or any material from getting into landfill and kill while we're doing construction. And just a quick cross-section of how we're going to stabilize the bank. We worked with the Army Corps of Engineers and New York State DEC department, and they came up with this design, which is kind of standard stream bank stabilization for these small creeks, which basically requires putting in some big boulders at the toe of the bank and then doing 1-foot lifts, compacted lifts of clay that we'll bring in to match the clay that's already there on the stream bank, and then hardening the bank with riprap and then putting in native plantings all along the repair area. That's all I have.
Okay. Well then,
Where will the clay come from?
Sorry?
Where will the clay come from?
Probably Red Wing. We'll get fill from them.
okay, we'll see.
There's nothing on site that we could use from construction.
And how many yards do you have estimated to be?
Not that many, maybe 4 yards, something like that.
Only 4 yards?
Yeah.
Bob.
I joined Sharon and Woody on that site visit, and in the LWRP consistency review that I prepared, I found that the design of the house, the siding of the house, the stabilization of the stream bank, and the restoration of the dam area are compatible with the applicable scenic area statewide significance policies, as well as the policies from the town's LWRP, as mentioned in the consistency review. The only concern that I had was the existing roadbed, and I inquired through the owner if he was going to have any oil or propane-powered machinery on the property. He said no. And because the concern was, could fuel trucks be able to navigate that roadbed going down to the house safely? And since there is no petroleum-powered generator sources, we really don't have a concern now at this time. However, should the owner down the road decide to put in a propane-powered generator or some other fuel-powered source on the property, and they would have to use that roadbed to bring down the delivery trucks, I think that roadbed should be evaluated at that time to see if it would be navigable as well as safely used by those vehicles, because you have steep gullies there with culvert pipes that lead all the way down into the Landsman Kill, and of course we all know that the Landsman Kill flows into Vanderburg's Cove, and so the consistency review covers all of those aspects of it, and that's all
So Bob,
Sorry. Michael?
I said thank you.
Go.
So the problem with fuel trucks coming down would be they would fall into the ravine, spilling oil into those
Yes.
ravines and then getting into Vanderburg Cove.
Oh, into the Landsman Kill.
Landsman Kill, and then the Southern
Yeah,
Road.
that would be a major concern for us, yeah.
It's not the fact of the trucks going up and down, it's if they would have an accident and fall into the gully. That's what I
Well,
understand.
going up and down could result in an accident. I'm not an
Yeah,
engineer,
right,
all right?
right.
So I'm just voicing some concern down the road. I mean, if Everybody says, the engineers say that the road's safe, fine.
Yeah, well, Woody, you said you would never send a fire truck down there.
That's right, absolutely not.
But I did look up the code, and the driveway does meet code, and Kathy Kinsella did approve the 10-foot width, but I looked up the code, and it's actually 12 feet. And we just measured before we came over, and our narrowest point, between two trees is 25 feet. And the roadbed, I think I was telling Bob, we're definitely going to put more item 4 on there and make it even
Well, I'm
more
going
so.
to address that when they
Sorry?
when they ask for my input, I'm going to address that.
Okay.
So we'll talk about it.
All right, Bob, you're all set?
We're all set.
Okay, we had 2 people, 2 members of our planning board, Woody and Sharon did the site visit. If you guys would give your report on what you found.
I did have a question. When you do the stream repair so that the water isn't going around on the outside anymore, will the old original dam that's there, is that secure enough to hold the water without it
Yes.
reaching again?
Yes,
Has an engineer looked at the old original dam?
I have.
And
Yeah, I mean, the dam is 130 years old. The main part of the dam was put in for Wilderstein Hydroelectric. And I did have a wing wall, if you will, engineered with enough concrete and rebar. All that concrete, it's about 4 feet wide, is all pinned to bedrock. So it's really not going anyplace.
Do we have a copy of those plans for the dam repair?
Sorry?
Do we have a copy of those plans for
Yes.
the dam repair? Okay.
I mean, this is one sheet from, I think, 8 sheets that I sent you on the repair.
Okay. So we do,
Was that engineer design or your design?
The DEC engineers gave me this drawing, and I did a joint application to Army Corps and DEC, and they came back with this design in order to do the stream back repair, and they basically said this is such a simple repair that it's covered by nationwide permit number 3. As long as you do this, and nationwide permit 3 has a lot of text to it, which covers this type of repair.
How high
So,
will the water level be coming up?
sorry?
How high will the water level be coming up from where it is now?
Well, right now, the water level is maybe 2 feet, and once the repair is done, it'll be about 4 feet.
It's coming up.
I show it here on the drawing that you have.
okay. If you wish to continue with your report.
How are you going to get, so you're going to have cement trucks down there for this repair?
No cement trucks.
No? Okay.
Just bringing in several yards of fill material,
Okay.
which will get compacted.
The clay. And how are you going to get it? How are you going to get it down there?
Using the access road coming in here. I mean, we could bring it down the approved driveway, but then I'd have to bobcat it from where the house is being constructed all along the stream bank, which wouldn't be great. And this Foxella Road, this old Foxella Road, has been there for 300 years, and I do have a in perpetuity easement to use that whole roadbed for any residential purpose. So, some smaller trucks with some fill will come down this road, and then I'll just, take that fill and start putting it into the stream bank repair area.
Is there a turnaround area at the bottom anywhere?
Sorry?
Is there any turnaround area down at the bottom?
There's a turnaround right about here, and there would be, that's why we'll need small trucks, and so bringing, it won't be a big 18-wheeler by any stretch. To put up with the fill here and then just get it over to the stream bank repair area, which is about 30 feet.
Woody?
Okay, I was the other person that attended that site review, and I have a document that I'm going to read for the public record. Okay? On April 26, 2018, I, Sharon Sherrod from the Planning Board, Robert Donaldson from the CAB, met with the applicant, Joel Helm, to review his site. As a result, I have these two concerns. The driveway to the site is extremely narrow with a major drop off on both sides. It is my opinion that the driveway is unsafe for fire equipment to have access to the proposed house site. To assure safety to the first responders and to operators of large trucks, I am requesting the town engineer and a representative from the Rhinebeck Fire Department make a site visit to review my concern and make recommendations to the applicants. The second one is the applicant addresses erosion on the shores of the Lansmanskill Creek, specifically bypassing along, the water is bypassing it, the existing dam. Based upon talks with the applicants, the New York State DEC has given him permission and recommendations to resolve this erosion problem. My concern is that since the repair will raise the water level at the dam, does the dam remain safe? All DEC correspondence regarding these repairs must be part of the application. The Lansmanskill is an estuary of the Hudson River. And I see there's two comments, there's two letters here which I see your neighbors are probably addressing. But I heard two things that concern me. This application is for a home and a garage, period, and erosion control.
Right.
I hear rumblings about a hydropower system down there on the dam, and I also hear things like the words tree farm being used. None of that is in this application, and as far as I'm concerned, none of that should happen unless it's reapplied to this planning board.
Okay.
I think there's-
This is a site plan approval meeting and stream bank repair.
That's exactly it, but if there's anything to do with power, it's another issue.
That's
It
another
has to
issue.
be started from scratch,
Of
and
course.
also tree farm,
I'm a
same
certified,
thing.
What
I've
is a-
had
what is a tree
DEC
farm?
foresters out twice who recommended that go for American Tree Farm certification, which we did and we got, so it's a tree farm.
So you're an ag district now?
It's all right, Tim.
I think we have
It's all right,
I think
Tim.
we have some open switches here.
I don't know that, just by virtue of being in the forestry program in the DEC, you're not necessarily in the Ag District 20. That's a whole different process. Of
Okay.
application to the Dutchess County Farmland Protection Board, which then makes a recommendation to the Dutchess County Legislature, which then, if they approve, they then make a recommendation to the state, which then signs off on it. So that is a different process than working through DEC. DEC is not involved in that process. Just for clarification, it's a different process.
So we're not tree farmers, fine.
No, you can be, I'm not saying that. You can have the forestry and be a tree farm, but you're not necessarily in an ag district because it's a different process, but you have your property included in an ag district. You can farm without being in an ag district, but if you're in an ag district farming, you have the protections of ag markets. If you're outside of the ag district, then you don't have those protections, things like the farm laws do not apply to you, even though you may be
That's fine.
farming.
I mean, I'm sure I won't be selling any trees in my lifetime, so.
Well, you will be, because that's part of the state program. You basically have obligated yourself to maintain the woodland on your property for productive use, and that there will indeed, part of the program is to expect that there will be periodic harvesting of trees.
Yeah, and we filed our forestry plan with the town. You'd have that downstairs
So
someplace.
that's part of the program, that you will be harvesting trees as part of the program. That's part of the
I
program.
forget what the language is. It was, boilerplate language from the
I'm
DEC.
sure it is. I'm sure it is. I think, yes.
What does this tree farm designation actually mean? I mean, I see signs for it all over the place and nobody's doing anything
I-
there. Are you obligated to cut trees at any specific time? So he could leave those trees for the rest of his life.
No, you
right?
can't. If you're in the forestry program under DEC, it's also similar to other tax abatement type programs. You are basically managing the woodland as a productive farm product.
Who
as a harvesting
designates when
product.
it's not
DEC will have foresters working with Mr. Thurman to do that.
To be clear, let's be clear, that, you know, I grew up in a farm out in Illinois, and 200 acres, and we were a tree farm. We were state tree farm year, farmers of the year back in the 80s. So when I came here and bought this property, of course I wanted to do what's right for the forest as opposed to making a bunch of money out of being a tree farmer. So I called in the local expert, the DEC forester, and she and I and Susan walked the property, and she came up with a 5-year plan for management, which mainly was making sure that trees were cared for properly, and that we put in brush piles and not remove them from the sites, for habitat, et cetera, et cetera. So we didn't officially enroll in the state tree farm program.
All right, well, then that is different.
She said, what you might want to do is go to an NGO, which is called the American Tree Farm Association. It's like it's not a state organization, it's just a tree farm organization, which you have to meet some of their guidelines, and that's all we are. We're not in the state tree farm program. We're in
Okay,
Is
that
it more
is
of-
different.
Is it more of the
American Tree Farm Service.
Yeah, yes, but is it more of a stewardship program than
It's
a?
all about stewardship. I mean, we love this 10 acres and want to take care of it and want to do the right thing. So we wanted to get expert advice, because I know Illinois forests, but I don't know New York forests. So we brought the New York State person in, and she recommended we get a tree farm certification.
Who'd you deal with?
Because once you join them, they'll give you mailers and newsletters about how to manage your forest.
I think what we're hearing though so far is that a couple concerns have been raised, one by Woody about the driveway, and the other just to have verification by probably our engineering consultant on the repair of the dam and the stabilization. I'd like to recommend that we refer both of those issues to Ray Jurkowski to give comment to us on the accuracy of those. Also, I think the fire department probably would like to have a look at this just to make sure the equipment can get back up and down.
Sure.
Brush fires, things like that do happen, and
Of course.
they may need to get down there. We certainly don't want the firemen,
Absolutely.
risking anything more than they already have to do to deal with a fire.
Of course.
If that's amenable to the rest of the members of the planning board, I'll have that taken care of.
We have other comment?
And we do indeed,
John,
Woody or Sherry, do you have anything further you want to say? Woody and Sherry, do you have anything further you want to say in your comments? Okay, John?
Is a copy of the engineer's assessment of the existing dam in the planning board file?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Because it wasn't part of this stream bank repair or the house site
Okay.
plan.
Just from a public safety standpoint, I think, it'd be good for the town to have a copy of that if you don't mind submitting it to the.
Sure, but so we all know, the dam is unlisted by the DEC. It used to be listed as a Class A, which is a non-hazard dam. The impound is way less than 1 million gallons, and it's just below the threshold of 6 feet for something that would classify as a Class A non-hazardous dam. So the DEC took it off their inventory about 10 years ago. And even then, it was a Class D, which means disinterested, frankly. And so they finally just took it off their roster altogether.
Okay, but a lot of times their classifications have to do with the downstream threats. that
It's
the
all
dam-
about the downstream
dam has
threats.
reached, but just in terms of being interested in the condition of the dam, if the board is interested in that, you might want to ask for the report.
To what end, may I ask? There's no one living.
Basically, to be on the safe side, if something were to breach and all of a sudden the water comes down, it could potentially do damage to the stream bank of the Lansman Hill itself. Now, while I realize as a Class C stream, DEC is not terribly concerned about it, our stream laws, but not in our zoning laws, do require us to be concerned about it and to make sure that there's very little, the likelihood of any damage of that sort happening is minimized.
Well, I mean, the good news is we have that condition right now. The dam has breached, and you see the erosion that's happening, which I want
Exactly.
to fix.
Exactly, and we certainly don't want to see that repeated if we can avoid it.
Okay, so I'll give you the report that we have done.
Thank
It's
you.
not going to talk extensively about, the seismic qualities of the dam and all, the stone dam and all that, but basically it says it's in good repair.
Well, it'll be a help to have that, it'll definitely be a help. Anything further from Eric?
Yeah, just a question about you talked about hydroelectric possible in the future. What is our concern if there is a hydroelectric plant there? What is does that increase downstream threats, or what exactly is our concern?
I honestly don't know. We have never dealt with that before, or treated that. That's something we have to look into, whether or not we should have any concern. I don't know.
Okay, Woody, I guess I'm asking you that you seem concerned about it.
Well, only because it's another function that's going to be introduced to that dam. How, when, where, I think is important. When they put, is it going to just take the water running over the top? Or is it going to be, the whole dam may have to be modified to allow this to function. That would be my concern.
Okay.
And I don't know that much about it.
And would it require any changes to the stream bank area for the equipment itself? We just don't know. And in that case, it would be a concern.
Okay,
because-
so then of course it would be additional construction.
Correct.
And of course we would
Correct.
look at it.
And it has to go through SECRA and Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the DEC, of course, Army Corps of Engineers. I mean, it's a whole big process, which is
It's not a simple task, that's for
It's
sure.
not a simple task.
Comments from the public? I have a couple letters up here, but if the people who wrote them would like to read them, that will save my voice. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Carol Nelson. First, I'd like to explain how we came to reside in Rhinebeck. As a child, thank you. As a child, I spent summers out of the city with my grandparents at a working dairy farm in Walk Hill, just across the river. I have fond memories of those years. It was then that I developed a love of animals and an appreciation of the natural beauty of the countryside. I attended the High School of Music and Art in New York City and Pratt Institute in Brooklyn as an art major. And during those years, I worked at a summer camp in Clinton Hollow, and so I became familiar with Rhinebeck. From the summer of 1964, I came here to town to spend my days off from camp. The dream then was to live here, but family and a job as an art teacher on Long Island and then caring for aging parents kept me on Long Island. Over the years, I returned here to visit the director of the camp, and the dream to live here was still with me. After retiring, after my parents passed, after my bout with breast cancer, in 2009 and 10, our first grandchild was born. We now have 4. Now is the time to live the dream. We bought the house on Mill Road in October of 2010. It is the place our family comes together on weekends and most holidays. It's the place our grandchildren love to come to. It is where they are building the fond memories of their own childhood years. It is here they explore, hike, learn about, and respect the natural world around them. We are now living the dream. Being in Rhinebeck, we enjoy its natural beauty, bucolic countryside, and peaceful surroundings, and we never take it for granted. I paint, I draw, I do photography in the art studio, and spend hours in the gardens. We have enjoyed all this town has to offer, and we have met wonderful people here. Our home sits on Mill Road. The path, formerly known as Fox Hollow Road, runs parallel to our backyard and alongside of our neighbor, Ute Boucher. We are, I just want to say, we have come here today not to crush Joel and Susan's dreams. We are not opposed to their plans. We are, however, very strongly opposed to them using the path formerly known as Fox Hollow Road, which is primarily owned by Ute Boucher. There is an alternative. We want Susan and Joel to use their approved driveway to access their land. Allowing vehicular traffic, cars, trucks, and vehicles hauling heavy loads on the footpath that was formerly known as Fox Hollow Road would change the peaceful nature of our surroundings and our homes forever. Seeing these trucks on the road, the noise drowning out the sounds of nature is both disruptive and intrusive. It is our hope that Susan and Joel will use their approved driveway on Mill Road, which is the designated access to their property, and not the path formerly known as Fox Hollow Road. By doing so, it gives all three families, Herm, Hochbaum, Nelson, and Boucher, the privacy and peace in all of our homes. And I hope the planning board will give serious consideration to our request. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I'm Carol's husband, Bert Nelson. As you heard, we live at 463 Mill Road. We purchased our home in 2010 from Mary Meyerson. We also retain our house in Hewlett on Long Island because 3 of our 4 grandkids live close by there. That's the community in which I served for almost 3 decades, most of that time as superintendent of schools. Nevertheless, this is my permanent and legal residence. I vote here, I participate in local, state, and national elections, and I, of course, will miss the school board elections for obvious reasons. In April of 2012, our neighbor Joel Herm and his wife, Ms. Hochbaum, bought from Mary Meyerson this piece of property which surrounds ours. Essentially, it's an L shape with this extension to Mill Road. This is adjacent to our neighbor, Ute Boucher. Ms. Boucher owns basically all of Fox Hollow Road and additional property that's part of it. When I say Fox Hollow Road, it's the former Fox Hollow Road. It's no longer called that, although people refer to it. That strip of land that Mr. Herman and Ms. Hochbaum own is 26.8 feet wide, and that's about right. This is a map that was prepared by Mr. Herm, and it says reviewed by Dutton Architecture, which I presume is what happened. And it's a proportionate map, and 26.8 feet is about correct. My wife mentioned that there is an approved driveway for the Herm-Hochbaum property, and that's up here. As a matter of fact, Mary Meyerson went to great length to readjust the whole property in order to make sure that an approved driveway would qualify. I have submitted to you a letter that I received in December, I guess it was, let me just look at my notes, December 7th of 2011 from the then acting zone enforcement officer explaining that that's the only approved access road for ingress and egress from that property. Right. Now, the strip of land that Mr. Herman has found owned is not level. This strip of land has gradation variations where some portions of that 26.8 feet may be 3 or as much as 6 or more feet higher and lower than the rest of that strip. So when you get right down to it, it is possible to walk on the land that they own. It is not possible in its current condition to have any vehicle on the land owned by Ms. Hochbaum and Mr. Herm. I need to point out what you may or may not be aware of. In the not too distant past, some years ago, after they bought the property, Herman Hochbaum had trucks driving down here to get to the dam to do work on it. Those trucks were 16-wheelers. They were operating 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, for several weeks. We're not talking about a small wheelbarrow or a skidoo or any other little device to get down. And not only did they go there for that length of time, but they disrupted my peace and quiet, my wife's, Miss Boucher's, and I'm sure our neighbors across the street. In addition, the road that was a so-called road used to access those trucks down to the dam, frankly, we know it's owned by Miss Boucher. What you don't know is that Miss Boucher had not given permission for it to be used, and certainly had not given permission for vehicles to be on it. There was a reference to an easement, and I'll make reference to that in a minute too. In addition to working on the dam, Mr. Herm had installed on Miss Boucher's property, and frankly on a little piece of mine, underground conduit and cable that went, I presume, from the dam, because I could only see it up to the point of the land, and then under, then crossing into my property. To my knowledge, no permits or authorization for that work was issued by the town of Rhinebeck. I looked into it at the time. I could not find any. In addition, it was only when Miss Boucher's attorney instructed Mr. Herm that he stopped his efforts to hook those cables to the Central Hudson grid. He did, I have to acknowledge, when I asked him to remove that portion of the cable that intruded on my land, I also had not given permission. He never even asked. Now, looking at the current application, to me it seemed like there were three elements. Okay, one was a request for permission to build a home. Frankly, as long as the applicable rules and laws and regulations are filed, we have no objection. We'd be happy to have a neighbor, a good neighbor, living in a home on that property. Second, there is a reference to the planting of 1 acre of trees, and it's in the documents that were submitted by Herman Hochbaum. We don't have any objection to our neighbors planting trees, whether it's a concentrated acre of trees or trees appropriately spread around the 10 acres that they own, that's fine. But if the intent is to plant those trees in a specific location, like here, for the purpose of being able to rationalize, justify, or excuse sending trucks and other vehicles down to deal with those trees, presumably as some sort of farm access road or some such thing, then we object strongly, because that's a subterfuge. It's a fake. It's an effort to grab a little piece of the zoning code and avoid having to deal head-on with the issue of there is only one approved access way to that property. If Mr. Herm and Ms. Hochbaum wish to apply for permission to install a second driveway on their property, they should make such an application. We respectfully request the opportunity to be heard if such an application is made. And finally, and most significantly, we request that the planning board not approve any part of the application without first making explicit and clear that both during construction and certainly thereafter, only the approved driveway, the only driveway that appears on this map, may be used for vehicular traffic. Now, I got done preparing those remarks, and I did give you a copy, by the way, of the 2011 letter that I received about what's the approved access route. When I started looking very closely at this, I mean, it's a deceptively simple drawing, but if you look closely, there are some alleged claims about what would you call it, an easement. I think it's referred to here as a roadway easement. Mr. Herm spoke about it. I'm going to tell you that the characterization of the easement that you just heard is not correct. The easement is not for Fox Hollow Road. Second, this gray area on the drawing, which I presume represents the easement area, has one minor problem. If I believe the scale on this drawing, which is 1 inch to 50 feet, it is showing an easement of 25 feet in size. No way in the world. If you look at the actual easement itself, and I've given you a copy from the records of Dutchess County's clerk, together with the map that is part of the easement, and an enlargement of it so you can see it, because the 8.5 by 11, you don't have a magnifying glass large enough to see it. But I gave you a blow-up of it also. The actual easement is on a footpath that is 3.125 feet in width. That easement, well, the easement does not permit for vehicular traffic. It certainly isn't designed for truck traffic. It does permit for foot traffic. And in no way does that give Herm and Hockbound any permission to use the entirety of the former Fox Hollow Road. That's property that's owned by Miss Boucher, who happens to be here this evening. She hasn't given permission for it. And the easement doesn't give permission for it. But please don't believe me, don't lean on my interpretation. Read it. I gave you a copy. It's very clear. It's not complicated at all. Most troubling, probably, is the distortions by omission and commission, which undercut, frankly, the veracity of the presentation that you heard from Mr. Herm. I had the privilege of serving as a hearing officer in a number of disciplinary matters. And I know that when someone engages in distortion of fact, that you have to question the credibility of everything they're saying. And there is, without question, a distortion of the application of the easement. And I don't know if you were told that this history of installing cabling and so forth was put in. Basically, I think that you ought to make clear to Herm and Hockbound what the then acting zone officer said in his letter of December 11th, and that hearing officer, I'm sorry, that acting zone enforcement officer was Michael Trimble at that time. I doubt that you remember one letter out of many.
I remember.
I'm glad. In any case, I gave you another copy. I'd like you to say, as a board, to Ms. Hockbound and Mr. Herm, quote, "The access point at which the old Fox Hollow Road joins Mill Road on Ms. Myerson's property, now the Herm Hockbound property, is not an approved access point for her property." One more thing. Our house is here. Every single window on two sides of our house overlooks Fox Hollow Road and a strip of land that Joel and Susan own. We don't have a problem with that. I mean, there's no surprise in it. And we knew that there was the opportunity for a footpath and for some walking back and forth. And that's fine, you know, neighbors spent time not far from neighbors. We didn't expect, and we don't accept, that 18-wheelers need to go down on Ms. Boucher's property without her permission in order to put in a hydroelectric generator or whatever it is for the purpose of selling electricity to Central Hudson. With all due respect, Mr. Herman, you are not Central Hudson, you are not a public utility, and you're not a private utility. You ran conduit on her land from that area of the dam to Mill Road with the intent of connecting it. This wasn't to supply you with electricity, it was to sell it. You're welcome to do it, but that requires this board's permission. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you. I think I can speak to some of the comments that were made, because I was indeed the acting CEO at that time. I do recall the problem with burying the conduit was done on neighbors' properties, and I can say that no permits were granted by the town of Rhinebeck for that to take place, and they were required. That did not happen. I also checked at that time with the highway superintendent to ascertain what the status was of Fox Hollow Road and the access point onto Mill Road. As an access point, Fox Hollow Road was no longer a road in the town. The town had no longer used it for that, and it was not an approved access point either for a road or for a driveway. It was not approved. The only access point was the driveway further up, which the planning board did approve for the use of that property for Mary Myerson, and then it was carried with the property and Mr. Herman purchased it. And I do have my very terse letter of 2011, which states quite clearly the only legal access point to that property, certainly for any vehicular traffic, has to be the approved driveway access point that the town planning board did approve. If any desire to try and change that, that has to go through an application process, which has not happened. At this point, it would be illegal to use the old abandoned Fox Hollow Road as a vehicular access point. Just entering Mill Road from that point, it is not an approved access point to get onto Mill Road from this property. So that at this point, that cannot be done. It doesn't mean that you can't apply to have that, and that doesn't necessarily mean you'll get the application approved to do that, given the condition of the road and who seems to own it, or the basic areas that road kind of goes over. So at this point, I would certainly hope, and I think we put it in any conditional approval, condition of approval, that not be to be recognized, that is not an access point, that is not a legal point of access to your property down to the dam. And I think that's something that we tried to deal with, I guess, about 7 years ago now, and I guess it's become somewhat lost in the mists of time. But that still stands, and that's still the legal designation of that access point. Are there other comments from the public?
I'm Jutta Boucher, and I live right next to Joe.
Would you speak into the microphone, please? Thank you.
And Carol and Bert Nelson, who Mr. Nelson really spoke for me, because I'm a foreigner. I don't live in this country, I just have a house here, and I come to enjoy this beautiful property I have. Unfortunately, I realized that the dam has done some erosions that worries me, because the water is going inside, and it made a huge tree fall down on the dam, by the way. So it's changed its road and going into the old bridge, which is not a bridge anymore, it stops there. And it is taking the roots away from the bridge, so the bridge might fall very soon, which is really a shame. And it will also change my property down at the tip. I'm not too happy about that. The next step is that I'm not happy to see any trucks on the easement that Mr. Hearn has. which originally was an easement for footpaths. And nobody talked about Foxhall Road. Foxhall Road didn't really exist. It was only a footpath. And that's how it looked when I bought the property. And all of a sudden, I saw trucks coming down without knowing anybody who would do that.
Well, that's not true.
No, I did not get a letter from you asking me to write down.
Phone calls and.
Not a phone call.
Michael,
We talked on the path.
wondered if
No.
Yeah. Mr. Hermsby, well, she has the floor.
Sorry.
Yeah, but this is Mr. Joe Hill. I'm always cutting in. So, we're not on the best terms, which is really a shame because I want to enjoy the property, enjoy my neighbors, and enjoy everything, and it's a shame that something comes up like that, that somebody cannot respect exactly what the easement says. And I would like him to be happy, have a beautiful house, and live as we do.
Right.
So this is, I think, from your tonight.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments they'd like to make this evening? Yes.
I haven't been down to the dam since the breach happened. I did see, the dam that was reconstructed, it was really a dam, but the concrete structure that was put in by you after Irene came through. I'm here and talking about this because I've been involved in Wilderstein for a very long time. And for a long time, it was our hope, maybe with winning, to develop a trail that would go actually across by footpath to the old dam, so people could see the historic site, to see the stone footings of the old dam, to even see the old bridge. Fox Hollow Road continues on, it used to continue on to where I live, which is Fox Hollow Road, which is, goes down to Glenburn, and it goes down to the Daytop Estate and and then it continues on down through Hyde Park. So, it was a town road, it was an abandoned road, but I too would just like to see as much of history maintained as possible along Fox Hollow Road, and even hopefully that the bridge won't collapse, if it was possible, and the stone footings of the old dam and get destroyed and washed out somehow, or covered over with more concrete. That's all.
Thank you, Judge.
Excuse me.
Oh, Meg Crawford. I mean, that's her name, not mine. Are there any other comments this evening? I think what I've been hearing, that there are a number of referrals you want to make, certainly to our engineer in terms of the driveway, the dam and the stabilization plan for the creek side, the stream side. I will double check with our highway superintendent. I believe the status of Fox Hollow Road has not changed. It was just a footpath, but it was no longer to be used for vehicular traffic. And certainly, since the last determination from the zoning office was that it is not to be used for vehicular traffic, it is not to be used for vehicular traffic unless a different approval is given through the planning process. So at this point, given that we have more information together, I'd like to ask for a resolution to continue this public hearing to June 4th. Second? Any discussion?
I'd like to ask a question about first of all, it looks like that the way the property is shaped, it looks like the intention was to use that access for something. That comment. But it sounds like the neighbor's problem would be helped by the stabilization of the bank and the filling in of
Hopefully,
it.
yes. Hopefully it will.
That seems to be something that would mitigate for doing this work. And you said that the only way to get trucks down there from the existing driveway is using Bobcats?
Yeah, the fill material would now have to come down this driveway and then go over basically a lot of, forest and meadowland. This is a wetland area over here, so it'd have to come along here to repair the stream bank, as opposed to using this, 300-year-old firmly
Right.
road-bedded access point.
Also, the right, I mean, first I heard it was only a 3-foot wide path, but then I heard there was 18-wheelers going down it, so I'm not making a picture in my head that fits that.
I think the easement is for a 3.5-foot path.
This doesn't.
Yeah. At this point, I guess maybe it does. I think, Eric, the point is, the land that much of that old Fonsola Road on is on a neighbor's property who doesn't wish it used for that, and I think
So
they have
that
that
strip
right.
that strip on that property, that's not where the road goes?
The
Right,
road weaves in and out of the property line, causing the issue between me and
And they
Mr.
don't
Shea.
wish to have it used for that, which I believe is their right.
I thought that was the road
No,
itself.
and the access point from the old Fox Hollow Road to Mill Road is not really an approved access point, an approved curb cut. Therefore, at this point, legally, it cannot be used for that function. And so,
But it sounds like two problems. One is the curb cut, and the other one is the fact that even if you get the curb cut, you can't use that strip.
not without the neighbor's permission.
That's not where,
No.
that's not where the
Correct.
road goes. is on the
Correct.
strip. Okay.
Well, our lawyer, Warren, did work things out that it's not 3.5, it's, the whole road bed, the old Fox Hollow road bed. So, but I understand that it'd be a separate application.
It would be a separate issue. So I think we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Very good. I think this one will be scheduled for 6:40. Thank you, Gretchen.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
may I respond to the confusion over the 3.5 feet, 3.125, and 20 feet?
Can you keep it very short?
Absolutely. 3.125 feet is the width of the easement to which Mr. Hearn referred. I've given a complete copy of the easement and a map to show that. 20 feet, it's actually 26.8 feet, is the width of the strip of property that Mr. Hearn and Ms. Hoptown own. They're two different things, and they do interrelate. I'm sorry for the confusion.
Thank you.
One last question.
Yes?
Right, Morgan. I'm assuming we need the fire department to look at the road bed before the
Yes.
permit could be,
Yes.
so, well, hopefully if there is going to be a interim meeting between now and June 4th, we could be on that meeting, please.
There probably will not be an interim meeting. If there is, it'll be a special workshop meeting for a couple very special functions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have one more public hearing scheduled, but we're not going to be able to move forward. It's with Kathy Shepherd, 22 Kelly Street. This is to do some work on a house in Rhinebeck, and our engineer, Ray Bukowski, raised a number of questions which he would like to speak with the engineer, the architect, the design person for this project, and he has yet to receive answers to the questions that he had asked that he was interested in, so we don't have a sign-off yet. So we're not in a position to move forward with this special use permit or site plan. So once again, I'd like to ask for a motion to continue this public hearing on June 4th at, I guess, 6:45?
Gretchen's raising the question that we think we had already put some things on the June agenda
Oh,
in terms of time. We don't have a copy of that here, so
Well,
all of these may need to
yeah.
slide back over.
okay, we're going to move it to June, and we will put a time to it as time permits. Did I hear a motion to that effect? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Very good. We have one more public hearing, which was supposed to be put here on the agenda, but didn't make it to this part. It's with Hudson Solar. We're reopening the public hearing tonight. The first thing we're asking for is we had,
It's on the agenda for 8.
well, I know, but it's not on the agenda for public hearing. So,
You have it under regular session.
Right.
Oh, is it under regular?
it's under regular session, but it's a public hearing, so we can do that now. We continue the public hearing on Hudson Solar. I'm sorry? Yeah. Basically, what we're going to do tonight is we had a workshop with George James, who is the visual consultant for the planning board, and after that, a number of recommendations were made for the visual analysis submitted by Hudson Solar, which we felt would correct some of the things that we thought would make it a little clearer what's going on and give us a better opportunity to assess the potential visual impacts. And so if you gentlemen would like to come up and make the presentation, I think Mr. Allen, the first thing what we're looking for tonight was a presentation of the visual submission that we just received, and I believe there's some other information that also was dropped off with Gretchen's office regarding this application.
So, again, Nathan Setmeyer, Hudson Solar. Before I introduce Matthew Allen, I wanted to give a precursor and a little bit of information on a supporting document. I believe it was all submitted to you, a document by NYSERDA that was produced in March, which does cover a lot of the questions that were brought up throughout this process so far. But the NYSERDA is really the go-to resource when it comes to this kind of stuff, and they cover things like hazardous material, decommissioning, if it raises ambient temperature, noise, transformers, water impacts, EMF. Any of this stuff is also covered in this NYSERDA report, which basically rules out solar from having any bad consequences with regards to glare, EMF, hazardous material, noise, things that we've already covered in some of our studies that we've done. NYSERDA did publish a document that does go through all that, so that was included in the resubmission from us. You should all have that. Next thing I'd like to cover is the new leased area that was agreed to by the property owner. That now, if you have your site maps out, I can point it out to you. It's shown here in this larger orange dashed area that is now 7.8 acres. That encompasses the new screening that we will be adding, along with a good amount of existing vegetation around the array area that we will uphold and keep, make sure the vegetation stays well. Obviously, you guys, the board has the right to come out every certain amount of years to take a look and make sure it's doing well, but we wanted to increase that area so that way there wasn't any question about what was our responsibility and what we could take care of. We also met with Amanda Miller and Jacqueline Murray just to try to get an idea of how we can work with them to figure out the visual impact that's going to have the biggest impact on them. So we did meet with both of them just to try to determine what views they were concerned about and what we could do to alleviate those. And they can speak for themselves, but I think during our interactions and the conclusions from that seemed to be that there wasn't really much of a visual impact, if any at all, from some of them. Again, they can speak for themselves. This time, I guess I can introduce Matt Allen. I know that he has screen to set up. You need a little bit more time to do that?
Well, if I could just ask the chairman where a good place to set the screen would be. If you've had anything like this before, there might be some bugs that I need.
Can you move that blackboard over a little bit? And
If I could put it right here, I just need an electrical outlet somewhere.
Well, that's probably the biggest challenge.
There's one right here.
We're not creating a trip fire hazard.
There's one behind the flag.
Oh, that would be good.
Is that okay for you, Michael?
It's okay if it's live, you just don't know if it's live.
Just take a paper clip.
Yeah, stick something in there and see if something happens, or maybe it doesn't happen.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I think we do.
Give me your phone.
you grab my... Technical difficulties.
There you go. Going
I
forward.
think it should
Yeah,
work.
yep, it's live.
Okay, good.
Project right on the wall, actually, I did that on Thursday, it was fine, and you don't need to screen, the wall works.
That's one that hold that desk over there. Either that or I guess you could use the stage. Trying to get the projector facing this way. Well, and you use that, so this needs to be. Now, I can see if I'm bringing this desk here. Want me to try to bring this over?
The letter was not served by the scene letters. Just to say.
I think we're ready. You okay getting in and out? Right here.
Is that happening?
Yeah, that just works. I'm like, geez, that just use the wall. Might be.
Not at all. It's not permission.
How's this thing? Pull that though.
There's an extension cord handy, you know that.
No, I was just saying, let's just use the wall. I was just thinking, it wasn't.
Don't, because to go across his entrance, to go across his meadow, he's just got to build a road. 2 years. Yeah, exactly. This was the, yeah, today. They weren't writing checks today, I'll have them tomorrow morning. Yeah, probably can. Okay, well, I have handouts for the board. Okay, you folks let me know when everybody's back.
So they're not going to select them.
Okay,
So,
so everybody all set?
yeah.
Go for it. Okay, my name is Matt Allen with Saratoga Associates, and I'm here representing Hudson Solar. I can just take this in the easy. And Hudson Solar has asked me to come in and address issues associated with potential visual impact of their community solar photovoltaic project, which is located at 355 Wittenberg Road in Rhinebeck. A little bit of history on the evaluation of visual impacts of this project. Can you hear me? Is the microphone on? Okay. I first submitted a visual assessment report, a brief report, on January 22nd of this year. And in that report were line of sight profiles, existing condition photographs, and project visualizations. Given that this is a relatively low profile project, I believe there was ample information in that report to help guide the board and help them render a determination of whether the project created a significant visual impact or was otherwise undue on adjacent properties. I guess the board wrestled with that a little bit and felt they needed a little bit more information. So the board brought in their consultant, George James, to give a very informative workshop on what visual impact assessment is all about, what tools are available. And in that presentation, Mr. James used the Hudson Solar project as an example of what might be done. So we took that information to heart and revised our report using some of the tools that Mr. James recommended, and reissued a supplemental visual assessment report to the planning board on April 29th of this year. So a week ago, that was made available to the board. So the board now has two reports in front of them for the review, the January 22nd report and the April 29th report. Both of those go hand in hand. Some of it is repetitious, but we wanted the board to have all the information available. Both reports are consistent in their conclusions, and I'm going to give you the findings up front, and then I'm going to walk through how we arrived at those findings. But what struck me when I first visited the site is that the perimeter screening on the site is significant and readily observable. If you walk Wittenberg Road, you'll notice that there's a hedgerow between the adjacent property that's visible from Wittenberg Road and the project site. And also on the project site, there's a dense successional understory of gray dogwood and red cedar. If you have had the opportunity to go out on the site, you'll notice that most of that existing understory is 6 to 7 feet tall and quite dense. You actually have to follow where some of the preliminary site work has been done, the paths that the geotech groups have done to actually walk around that site. Otherwise, the understory is so dense it's very difficult to walk through the site. The key findings are that direct or unobstructed visibility into the project site is actually limited to the project site itself. If you're off the project site, it's very difficult to have an unobstructed view into the project site. So what we're talking about with potential impact is filtered visibility will occur from several immediately adjacent properties. However, given the surrounding woodland vegetation, hedgerows, and dense understory, visibility from the immediately adjacent properties is either non-existent because of the density, or for several properties, I would classify it as filter. And again, I'll show you what I mean by that as we go through the presentation. Off-site visibility, and given that there is filtered visibility, that is during the winter leaf-off season. During the summer leaf-on season, that visibility will be reduced to 0 or very near 0. And again, I'll demonstrate that to you. And we also found that no project visibility was found, or no meaningful project visibility was found from any other off-site locations, meaning that potential visual impact is truly limited to the immediately adjacent properties, and I will show you those, and we will identify those properties specifically. The first thing I wanted to tell you about is what is this project all about? I'm sure that the board has read all the materials and truly understands that this is just a low-profile solar field that is comprised of 7 to 8 foot tall solar panels. I'm 6'2", so 7 to 8 foot is about as high as I can reach. That's the height of the project. It will not go any higher than that. That's less than the height of a single-story house. It's probably about the height of most of the understory vegetation that's on the project site. So there's a real opportunity here with the existing undergrowth and successional growth with the surrounding forest that the project will actually be behind the vegetation that exists on the project right now. It's just not very tall. There are 14 parallel arrays, or lines of arrays. If you look at the project plan, you'll see what I mean by that. The panels slope to the south to catch the sun. And they're mounted at existing grade. And that's important. What that means is there's very little earthwork associated with the project. There may be some minor earthwork for drainage, but the property is comprised of impervious surfaces, so there's not going to be bulldozers coming in to level the field. It's the panels are really just going to follow the existing terrain. And the project will encompass a 1.89 acre footprint area, and that is the fence line. So all the panels will be located within that. And that is roughly 220 feet by 390 feet in dimension. And it's all enclosed by a 6 foot tall wire mesh agricultural fencing. And as I mentioned before, it's largely surrounded by woodland, which is a combination of deciduous and evergreen species. The non-forested portions of the site are densely vegetated with successional growth. And I have photographs to show exactly what that is. Just visually, these are some generic photographs of what a solar farm project looks like. Again, these panels are no taller than 8 feet above grade. They don't require any earthwork. The vegetation in the below them will be, correct me if I'm wrong, but they've just maintained as a natural herbaceous area that will be mowed a couple times a year just to keep it down so it doesn't grow up above the solar panels. And you can see just a generic photograph of what the farm fencing that will surround it will generally look like. And here's an aerial view of the project site. This is known as the Sherrod property at 355 Wurtemberg Road. And you can see from the aerial photograph the density of forest that is on the property and on immediately adjacent properties. And all of the surrounding abutting landowners are called out in these notes. And you can see the footprint, 1.89 acres. The yellow line is the fence line. Beyond that, there'll be very little clearing and no grading. And inside that will be the 14 lines of solar arrays that are just mounted at grade, so they will terrace up. There's a very slight slope from south to north, going higher in that direction, and those will just hug that terrain. The project also includes some evergreen planting largely at the north corner of the property. The purpose of that is to add additional screening for anything that could potentially be visible from Wurtemberg Road. Personally, I think that's probably unnecessary, but the applicant is committed to it. And it's certainly not a bad idea, but I think it will have relatively modest additional screening value over the existing vegetation along the perimeter and on site that will remain. There's also additional small area of vegetation you'll see to the south, right in that area. And that's just a small stand of evergreen trees that are very carefully located to block the view from an upper story window at 43 Frost Road. We did some very careful siting analysis to make sure that that is right on the sight line from the upper story window. And we'll show you some project visualizations that show exactly what that view will be and how that vegetation will mitigate it, and also what that property owner can expect from other ground level views as he's out enjoying his yard. And this is just a graphic identifying the areas of major woodland. This is mature, mostly deciduous, but some mixed evergreen vegetation. And that is all probably at least 50 feet tall, in some cases taller, with fairly dense understory growth. And inside that, that is not cleared meadow. That is many years of successional growth, as I mentioned, gray dogwood and red cedar that's 4 to 6 and up to 10 feet tall. Okay, what we did several things here to evaluate the visual impact. Some of them were in our January report, and we also added viewshed mapping at the request of Mr. Janes following the visual workshop that was conducted here a couple of weeks ago. So we did 5 things to evaluate visual impact. Generally, they all slightly give us different information, and none of them can be definitive on their own. 2, 3, or 4 of them combined can give you a very good impression of what the views will be and help you draw conclusions. Viewshed mapping, I'll just define them very quickly. Viewshed mapping is a plan view based on line of sight profiles that identifies the maximum geographic extent of project visibility. It doesn't tell you what you can see, it only tells you where you can see it from. And the viewshed mapping is based on 9 what we call control points within the solar farm. So we took 9 sample points, and think of it this way: if there was a light bulb at each one of those 9 points projecting light outward onto the landscape, any place the light touches would be in the viewshed, and any place where it's shadowed would be out of the viewshed. And we'll show you what that map looks like in just a moment. We also did line of sight profiles, which are a very common tool to identify what falls along a particular line of sight from the study locations. We cut a line of sight profile from every adjacent residence, every occupied structure, as well as one from the adjacent property where there is no occupied structure, but that was kind of a void area in the area that we knew would have potential visibility. So we cut that line of sight profile just so that we would know what was happening from that particular location. I also provided reverse visibility photos. That's a typo. It's not reverse visibility profiles. It's reverse visibility photos. And what these do is they determine the effectiveness of existing vegetative screening. That's based on the principle of reverse visibility, which very simply, and everybody can understand quite easily, if I can see you, you can see me. There's nothing in the way. The sight lines work in 2 directions. So what I did is went out on the site with a stepladder and took photographs from the perimeter of the site looking outward at each of the adjacent residences to get an idea of how well the existing forest and understory growth screened those structures from the project site. The principle being, if I have a hard time seeing the structure from the project site, people at that structure are going to have a hard time seeing the future solar field. And I'll show you photographs of that. We also prepared project visualizations. And a couple of weeks ago at the visual assessment workshop, Mr. Janes went into some detail talking about project visualizations. And there's really 2 types. And we did 2 types here. One type we did in our January submission, then at Mr. James' recommendation, we added the second type. The first type is just a three-dimensional computer model of what the view would look like. Everything in the model is computer generated. The trees, the topography, everything you see was put in by myself as a visual technician building a three-dimensional model of what the view would look like. Mr. James saw that and questioned it and wanted to know why we didn't do photo simulations. So we went back and added a photo simulation from a key location to show how the project visualization compares to that photo simulation. And the reason we did not do photo simulations up front, I do those all the time, and I made a conscious decision here to do a fully computer-generated visualization because all views from off-site are so screened by existing forest that trying to do a photo simulation and effectively show what something would look like through existing understory and forest growth in a leaf-off season is very tedious and not very accurate. There's a lot of artistic interpretation that could go on in that type of simulation. So I opted to do fully 3D modeled, which shows actually more visibility than actually occurred. Mr. James used an adage in his presentation in talking about photo simulations and trying to simulate something behind an existing forest. And he said, when in doubt, leave it out. Simply what he meant there is err on the side of conservatism, show more. Don't try to be so accurate that you might end up showing less than will actually be there. And that's exactly why I chose 3D visualizations up front, is we were trying to be conservative and actually show more than would actually exist when the project is built. And the last thing I did was field verification. And the best thing you can possibly do when you're doing a visual assessment is to go out and look. See what the existing conditions are, what the existing vegetation are. I strongly recommend that if the board hasn't done it, that they go out and walk Württemberg Road. I'm sure the project sponsor would be happy to take people on the site so that you can see for yourself what the view outward is and looking at the existing buildings. The photographs that are in my report are very good and disclosive. However, we're always trying to present a 3D environment in a 2D piece of paper. So it never quite looks as real as it does when you go out in the field. So there's no substitute for going out and actually taking a look. And best to take the photo simulations and the viewshed maps and the line of sight profiles and try to understand what all those mean within the real world context. Okay, viewshed mapping. Now this is a fairly frightening map, so let me explain to you exactly what this is. A viewshed map, as I mentioned, is a three-dimensional projection of the areas that a project site, that some portion of the project site could potentially be visible from. The purple I call the bare earth condition. What I mean by that is that there were no trees, no buildings, no nothing to screen anything within a 2-mile radius, and the outer ring that you see here is 2 miles. If every tree were cut down, blown down, or lost in some manner, the purple area is the area where you could potentially see the proposed solar farm. And remember, the solar farm is only 8 feet tall. So if you try to imagine what that would look like if you were standing someplace 2 miles away looking at something that were barely taller than a person, granted a much bigger footprint, but something very low to the ground. Even in that scenario, you would have a hard time seeing it. So the bare earth condition is a very, very unlikely condition. But we show it anyway because it's part of the process that helps the visual analyst understand areas where a visual analyst should take into account, maybe go out and take a quick look and confirm that these areas are in fact screened or blocked by micro-topography. This map is put together using regional scale terrain, best available regional digital elevation models. And when you go out and look, there are things like small hills, areas along roadsides that are graded that simply are not picked up in the database. And that's particularly true along Württemberg Road, where it shows visibility, but when you walk Württemberg Road, you'll notice that there are small hills along the side of the road that are going to block your view from off that road. So that's why it's important to go out and field confirm. The orange area you see is what I call the forest cover viewshed area. And that's a conservative projection of potential visibility. This takes into account only major forest areas in visual screening. And you see that that culls down the viewshed extensively. It really brings it into just within a few hundred yards of the project site. And that's when you take this map and go out and walk that area and see, does it appear real to you, or are you finding even greater screening? And when I went out and field confirmed the viewshed map, there are things such as hedgerows, understory vegetation that can't be picked up easily on aerial photography, or if it can, you're not quite sure how dense it is and whether it forms a visual screen. Can you see through it? So that's why I used a three-tiered approach here, and I went in and I added hedgerows and other localized vegetation that wouldn't be classified as forest vegetation, where you might expect some filtered visibility to go through it. I mapped that, and once I did, that's what brought the visibility, the direct visibility of the project down to only the project site. So what you see in red, and I'll move into a closer view here, what you see in red is the area that I would classify as direct visibility of the project. There's really very little in the way that's going to block your view of the project. And that is almost entirely within the property boundary of the Sherrod property. Once you get off that, you have hedgerows, you have understory, you have localized vegetation that's going to provide filtered visibility. So while there might be some visibility from the orange area, there will be virtually no direct visibility in the orange area. And that's really what all the viewshed tells us. It doesn't tell us what it's going to look like or how much of it you're going to see. It just tells us where we might see it from. So I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit because I know I'm not going to hold your attention all night with this scintillating stuff. Line of sight profiles give you an idea of what can be seen from a particular structure. So the white lines you see on here are lines of sight that we drew from every occupied structure immediately abutting the project property. And these are what line of sight profiles look like. It's simply a cross-section through the terrain with the hills projected, existing vegetative masses projected, and then from the study location, generally they're occupied structures, we project a line of sight outward and till that line of sight hits a tangent point along the topography, and then we see, are any of the solar panels visible above that line of sight? If they're not, they're either partially or totally screened by existing topography, and then we look at the same thing for existing vegetation. We get a good sense of what's in between somebody's home and the proposed project. And we did that from 7 different properties. And all of that is in the package that you have from both January and April. Now moving into what I refer to as the reverse visibility photographs. This is where I went out on the site, stood on a 2-foot step ladder, so I got the camera up to 8 feet above ground, and looked outward along lines of sight between the outer perimeter of the project, basically from the fence line outward to look at existing buildings. So very quickly, this one is looking in a northwesterly direction toward 340 Wittenberg Road, which is the old Rhinebeck Inn. We have an advantage here in that the roofs of these structures are orange, so we can see them very clearly. And you get an idea of how difficult it is actually to detect those buildings through the existing vegetation. And all that existing vegetation will remain after the project's built. So again, the principle, if I can see you, you can see me. If I'm standing here looking at the old Rhinebeck Inn and somebody's standing on the front porch looking back at me, that same degree of vegetation would be filtering both views. And also looking toward 361 Wurtemberg, which is a directly adjacent property. There is a dense area of forest vegetation between that structure and the project site. I could not see that structure from the project site, so my conclusion is that structure would not be able to see the proposed project either. And looking northward, there's an existing barn, unoccupied structure on a parcel north of the project site, so you can get an idea of the existing hedgerow and how that screening blocks that view. And again, looking at 340 Württemberg from a different northern corner of the property, that the vegetation, first one was at an eastern corner, and the second one is at a western corner looking toward that same location, and the degree of visual screening is roughly the same for both those potentially most visible parts of the project as looking from 340 Württemberg. Looking to the south, one of the residents that we took the most close look at because of its proximity and the level of filtered views that occur there is 43 Frost Road. At 43 Frost, there's the main residence, which is a two-story structure, and a garage that's located almost on the property line on the northern portion of that property. So you can see those structures through the existing vegetation. The garage is most prominent, but you can make the house out through a line of existing trees closer to that southern property line. And also to the east of the project is 61 to 63 Frost Road, which is one parcel, and on that parcel is a single-family residence and an adjacent mobile home. Both of those are visible through the existing forest with a full view. So again, the view from those properties to the structures, to the solar structures, will be heavily screened, but there is some visibility that may occur. And this is again looking at 43 Frost from the southern portion of the property. So this is the nearest portion of the property to those structures, and you can see the level of existing intervening vegetation that will remain. And you're looking to the southwest toward 33 Frost Road and to St. Paul's Lutheran Church at 371 to 381 Württemberg Road. From this location, you can't pick it out in this photograph, you can see the steeple of the church at the tree line, but because of the density of the forest, you cannot see the bulk of the church structure itself, let alone the ground plane around the cemetery or around the church grounds itself. And all you can see of 33 Frost Road from the project site is the roof. So the conclusion there is anything from that property, either at ground level or from an upper story window, would be a heavily filtered view at most. Okay, moving on to project visualizations. We took all the data that we had up to this point and identified the areas where views into the project site were likely. And as I mentioned, 43 Frost Road and Württemberg Road in front of the old Rhinebeck Inn clearly would have some potential for views. So you can see the orange arrows I put in here are the locations that we did our project visualizations. And here is a view from 43 Frost Road. The owner was nice enough to allow us on the property last January when the leaves are completely off the trees. And this is a view from that property from the back deck. So this is maybe 2 feet above grade at a place on the property where presumably the residents enjoy the outdoors as much as any other place on their property. And you can see the level of intervening vegetation. It's very hard to see daylight down at ground level. And you can imagine when the leaves are on the trees, this is, I'm sure, very close to a 100% screen. Now, this is what I did as a project visualization. This is a complete computerized model of what that same view would look like. And using Mr. Jane's adage, when in doubt, leave it out. If we go back to the original view, you can see the level of vegetation in the immediate foreground. In this visualization, we were very conservative in how many trees and understory shrubs I put into this visualization because I wanted to overestimate how much the project would actually be seen. There are circumstances if the owner might have thinned that vegetation or there might have been some other circumstance that created greater views. I wanted to make sure that that was fully disclosed. So this is a visualization of the project. The project is actually modeled in there, and from ground level it completely falls behind the cedar that you see on the project site, the gray dogwood that's on the project site. You have to get up very close to the photograph to actually see any hint of the solar panels behind it. Remember again, they're only 8 feet tall, which generally is shorter than the understory growth and the successional growth on the project site. And as I mentioned, we also added mitigating vegetation for this particular homeowner. As I mentioned, that mitigating vegetation is largely to help screen views from the upper story window, which obviously when you get up another 10 feet in elevation, then you can start looking down above the filtering vegetation. So we added that, those white pines to help block that view. Obviously from the deck elevation, those do not do anything to further mitigate, but I do show them here because that is part of the plan. So now we move to the upper story window view. And what I point out about this view is we took it in January, so obviously the window was closed, so we're taking it through a glass pane, and there was also a screen on the window. So the photo is not as if we were standing with, photographing the direct view. We're photographing through glass and a screen, so it does have a bit of a gray tint to it, which is representative of the actual view on the day that we took it. But you can see this view is slightly elevated, so now you're not seeing the screening effect of the foreground understory growth. You're above that looking down. And that is why we offered white pine mitigation. And here's the visualization using the same model of conservative estimating to show too much. And here you can start to see the blue solar panels that are up in the middle right portion of the photograph. So you're starting to see those lines of solar arrays that are slightly visible above the foreground vegetation. So that's exactly why we offered the mitigating vegetation. And you can see, using 3D modeling, you can be very precise in where you locate those trees. So there's no opportunity to miss in assuming that where you locate it might be the right place, and in fact, you're not catching the sight line. When you use 3D modeling, you actually can locate them exactly where you want them. And in this case, we show them at, I believe, about a 5-year growth. White pines will grow 1 to 2 feet a year. So conservatively, we show them about 15 feet tall. And at that point, they're just about ready to fully screen what's behind it. And then we move to Württemberg Road. From this location, this is directly in front of the old Rhinebeck Inn. And here you can see, and I'll put the microphone down. This area here is a hedgerow. It's not very wide, but it's very dense. So it provides maybe a 50 to 70 foot or 70% filter to what's going on behind it. And that's very important to helping minimize the visibility from that particular location. So here's the 3D visualization. Again, very conservative from that location. We don't give that hedgerow as much credit as it actually has when you look at it in the field. And you can see from here, you're looking at the back side of the solar array. Again, they slope to the south. So you're looking at the north side, so the underside, which is more in shade. So it tends to blend better with the surrounding environment. You don't see the blue of the glass panels on the front. So they're very difficult to detect at this size and through that level of vegetation, even when we're very conservative in how we present it in the visualization. And this one shows what it would look like if that white pine buffer were installed directly along the fence line between Württemberg Road and the project site. Now what you're seeing is mostly those white pines and not any of the fencing and solar panels beyond it. And we took a very similar view here and actually did a photo simulation. So remember I said that the project visualizations are completely computer generated. Photo simulations are a marriage of 3D computer modeling merged into an actual photograph. So this is a photograph taken just a few weeks ago in full leaf-off condition, and you can see the effectiveness of the existing screen. This is an existing condition photograph. And this is adding the 3D model of the solar arrays behind that. Again, very difficult to detect. And this is the unmitigated condition. There is no white pine screen in this particular image. But here we add that white pine screen, and it almost completely blocks the line of sight into the project. So very quickly, the conclusions that we drew is that the project visibility is highly limited and minor. The existing trees and understory provide a very dense visual barrier. And Importantly, the screening is readily observable. And again, I can't stress the importance of going out and taking a look. You don't have to believe the report, but if you field confirm it yourself, I think you certainly will draw the same conclusions. Again, direct unobstructed visibility will occur only from within the project site. From off the project site, filtered visibility will occur through existing woodland and understory growth, primarily from 43 Frost Road and 6163 Frost Road, as well as a short section of Württemberg Road in front of the old Rhinebeck Inn. Those were the only locations that I identified that would be able to see the project at all. Other visibility from other properties, or from those affected properties, would be fully or near fully screened during leaf-on season. So again, we're looking at the worst case. All the visualizations are done during leaf-off season. During leaf-on season, it would be very difficult to detect the project at all. And there's no meaningful visibility found from any other off-site location. And when looking at the project from the perspective of SEQR, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, SEQR does have a standard for how you would define a significant adverse visual impact. And that is that the project would cause the diminishment of public enjoyment of a listed resource. And what classifies as a listed resource are places of statewide importance, such as parks, wildlife management areas, forest management areas, places where people go to recreate. Places that are on the National Register of Historic Preservation are also listed resources. St. Paul's Lutheran Church is on the National Register. However, the analysis we've done shows that that will have no views through the existing forest. So there certainly is no adverse visual impact there, and it's hard to imagine that that would meet the criteria for diminishment of public enjoyment of that resource, when it's very difficult, if possible, to see the project at all. And that is all I will show at the moment, and I'll open the floor up to questions.
Yes. How tall will the white pine tree plantings be? Because you talked about them being, at 5 years growth, they would be 15 feet. What we're not seeing, I guess we saw the no screening and then the 5-year screening.
Yeah, they'll be planted at 8 to 10 feet, which is a standard nursery stock, standard large size nursery stock.
I have two questions. One, did you know the old Rhinebeck is a National Register property?
I did not find it on the National Register list. It doesn't surprise me.
Okay, it is on there.
Okay.
It's just because at the end when you were talking about seeker and what the impacts are.
Yes, that does not surprise me. It occurred to me it might, and I did check it on the list that I have immediately available. It was not on it, but it did occur to me. But that the criteria is still the same. Would the project diminish the public enjoyment of that? And given that it's a private property, even though it is open to visitors, or open to travelers and anybody that wants to stay there, it's not considered open to the public in the sense of being a public resource under SEQR. But that's why we did evaluate the view from that location. So it certainly could be argued that the project creates an impact, but the question is, does it create a significant adverse visual impact where the project should be judged based on that view?
Well, I guess I'll let the innkeepers address that part, but, and it's on the state website for historic properties.
I apologize, I missed that.
And then just my second question was, why did you only focus on adjacent properties? So I'm 329 Württemberg Road, so that road frontage that you have up there, it says a short section of Württemberg Road in front of Old Rhinebeck Inn. My property is right to right north of that. I have a long driveway.
Okay.
And I told the board that I could potentially see the project from our driveway, which we use basically as a private road to walk up and down. And Hudson Solar was kind enough to come out to our home, and Nate was even kinder to stand in the project site with a pole with a flag on top of it sort of waving it at the height he thought the array would be. And there were definitely spots, and hopefully, Nate, I'm saying this accurately, there were definitely spots that I could see his flag from me standing on the ground in my driveway. And so if I can see it, that means Susan, our other neighbor, can see it, and it definitely means that Phil, the property that I'm surprised you haven't even mentioned, I know Phil didn't want you guys coming onto his property, but I told Hudson Solar I would let you guys come onto my property. I even asked them how much it would cost. If it was a cost issue, maybe we would pay for it. And so that would also, just because Phil won't let you guys on his property, I don't think it means that I should be, that should be to my detriment. And so I could see the flag from Nate. Granted, it wasn't, some high-tech visual assessment, but like you said, he can see me and I can see him, and, it can be seen. So. So what are we going to do about that?
Well, it's a fair observation, and that's the purpose of this viewshed map, is that identifies exactly what you're talking about. The orange area, while that's not direct visibility, that is the potential for filtered visibility, which is exactly as you've described. If Nate was holding up an orange flag on the property and walking up and down the property line, you probably would be able to see that orange flag from time to time as it passed through areas of lesser intervening vegetation.
Yeah, he wasn't walking on the property line, just to be clear. He walked like on the line where the array was going to be.
Yes, I'm sorry, on the fence line.
Yeah. But I guess, then I'm confused. But I guess maybe the third question, sorry, is that you're talking about filtered visibility. Is the filtered visibility stuff that you guys will or will not be screening?
Filtered visibility, first of all, during leaf-on season would be a virtually 100% visual barrier.
I'm talking about like winter.
Yeah. In winter, from Wurtemberg Road, other areas where there are no occupied structures, no, there would be very little need to do that.
I'm talking about my driveway.
The question to be asked is, would the degree of filtered visibility that would remain, and it's my opinion that it would still be very difficult to detect those solar panels, largely because you're looking from north to south. You're looking at the back side of them where it's angled in such a manner that that side is shaded and darker and closer to the color of the surrounding vegetation and the intervening vegetation. That would be very difficult to detect. So the question is any visibility unacceptable? Should the standard here be invisibility? And I think that's a difficult standard to achieve. If that were the standard, this board would have a hard time approving anything ever.
I mean, I just find that incredibly shocking, because from the moment we've got here from last summer, we've been told that we will not see this project. We'll see it a little bit, because if that was the case from the beginning, maybe what you're saying wouldn't come as a shock, but we were told we would not see it. And so from our perspective, and I'm sure my neighbors can also speak for themselves, we were under the impression, and I think even Mike Trimble at one meeting said that if you can see it, you can't vote for it. And so we're under the impression that minor visibility, filtered visibility is unacceptable. But so I guess your answer to whether the filtered visibility is going to be screened is no. Like you're not going to add additional screening to make sure it's not visible.
Well, let me ask you a question. I'm sure there are other things that you can see from your property. Utility lines along Wurtemberg Road. I don't know whether it's your property or not, that has the structures with the orange roof.
That's not my property.
Okay. Do you find those objectionable?
I find that those enhance the character of the neighborhood, because one of them is from like the 1700s and it's a carriage house. And one of the reasons why we bought our house a few years ago is because the street is beautiful. You turn left off of Slate Quarry, you're immediately see an old Judge Traber home. As you drive down, there's another old 1700s farmhouse that's a historic building but not on the register. Then you have the innkeeper's home, you have the church, you have all of these historic properties, and then you have these beautiful barns. So to me, it's where I want to be. It's rural, it's beautiful. So no, that's not objectionable to me.
Okay, that's a fair answer. I'll let the board ask the questions. But I do point out that a standard of invisibility is simply not achievable for any project, almost anywhere. Very, very rare project is not going to be seen from an off-site location. So I think it's very understandable that simply is not a practical standard to be applied to any project. The understanding visibility is the key to determining whether mitigation is appropriate. And I think we've identified where the greatest visual impact would be, albeit that greatest visual impact is fairly minor visual impact. That's where mitigation planting have been proposed. We did not look at mitigating areas where there are no occupied structures. So views from driveways where people pass was not considered. I don't have the answers whether that should be considered.
I don't pass it, like I said, we actually use it as like a private road for us to like, you know, walk and enjoy our property.
Oh, I understand, I understand.
And so, yeah.
Just to add, two things, I guess. One, the planned screening does cover a good portion of that north part of the array, so I do believe where I was standing is actually going to be behind where those pines are going to be planted even. So there's going to be an additional layer from what you saw even with me. And granted, me waving an orange flag is nowhere even close to what seeing a structure that's sitting there, not moving, that's not orange. It's not even close. I mean,
well, I think I gave you the benefit of the doubt in the description. I guess if you could just humor me and like, let's say the array goes up and those pines are there, and my view is to the back of the panel, and from your perspective, both of you, the visibility is limited, it's minor, but I think it's also in the eye of the beholder. And so what if, just what if, the visibility is more than what you guys think it is? Like, is there going to be, you know, something in place where I can just be like, hey Nate, you know, this really looks bad, can you come over here and look at it, and maybe we can work on like planting another bush? Like, how does that work?
I'm not sure. I do know that the board has in their schedule a certain amount of years they'll come out and assess how the screening is doing and the footprint that we have leased and how that is holding up. I don't know if that can get covered during when they do that process. I'm not exactly sure.
It would be part of that process, because we got to re-approve the permit in 3 years and then every 5 years. And if the screen wasn't functioning in 3 years, we would not be able to reapprove the permit.
So I'd have to wait 3 to 5 years if there was like a problem. I guess what I'm saying is like, part of what I think some of the issues are is that because unfortunately, because it's not there, right? We're just kind of all guessing to a certain extent. And so I'm saying if it goes in, which obviously we all, at least over here, hope it doesn't, but let's say it goes in, you know, and then the minor and limited visibility isn't so minor and limited, when you look at it, is there going to be something before the 3 or 5 years to be like, hey guys, can you please add more shrubs or trees or whatever it is that you're planting?
The planning board can require that. You can require in 1 year to come out and look and take a look and see exactly what's happening. Is the screening working? Is it not working? And you could require, as one of the conditions of approval, that part of the screening be enhanced.
Okay.
And again, just because we did do the whole kind of back and forth and walk the property line, I will reiterate that what your view is going to be the back of the panels. And already that view is really going to be during the January, February, winter months. What you're going to be seeing is a white back sheet is really what you're going to be seeing. So it's going to blend in with the snow to begin with. It's definitely not going to be, it's not going to be kind of in your face like a waving an orange
No, I
flag will be.
understand, but if there's no snow and it's just like, you know, before it was sort of like described as though the back of the panels are going to be gray, but if the back of them are white and there's no snow, or the snow isn't up that high, and like, you know, the shrubs are basically gray at that point, that might stick out. I mean, again, we're just kind of all like guessing here, but to me, when you say like the backs are white, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to see that, you know?
To me, it would be very, very, I mean, if it was hard to kind of pick the few spots where waving an orange flag could be seen, based on my opinion, it would be very, very hard to see a stationary object that's white and gray through all of that as well. It's not moving. That's also, like I said, it's going to be behind. The screening that we're adding is a good portion of that corner. Obviously, it's more towards the old Rhinebeck Inn, but it does wrap around a good portion. From what I remember from when we were doing the test, it really only was that western edge where it started to drop off a little bit and it got a little thinner when I was waving it, that we had that visibility, and that should be where that white pine line is behind.
Yeah, I mean, I know it was on that border. I don't remember, because it seemed like, depending on where you were, on various parts of my driveway, I could see it.
Yep.
But I agree, neon flag isn't the same as the panels, but that's, since Saratoga wouldn't come onto our house, this is what I have to work with, you know what I mean?
Yep.
So,
This is something we can revisit, say next January, assuming this goes in, and the leaves are off again, to see exactly how effective the screening is, and another leaf off period.
Was there some guarantee that they would bring it to some level of invisibility?
I think that once again, we're going to want to take a look and see what is visible, what's functioning. Is the screening functioning? Is it not functioning?
but Michael, if I just ask you, when you say functioning, are you going off of the, it can be limited visibility, or are you going off of it should be like 99% invisible?
I think we're shooting for as invisible as we can get it, realistically speaking. I think that if you can see just a glimmer of something, you don't know what it is, can't tell what it is, and then it tends to disappear, I don't think that would be as big a problem. If you can look at it and say, yeah, that's what it is, I can see it right there, I can see the metal, I can see whatever, then that's a problem, and that needs to be addressed. Other questions? Yes?
Well, I too was confused because I was under the impression that if you could see this, it wasn't going to be able to be approved, and I'm almost certain that's kind of what the planning board had said last fall. So this is actually really surprising, and it's not totally surprising to me because I walk down Wurtemberg Road with my dog every single day, and probably like one of the most beautiful parts of Wurtemberg Road is right in front of the inn, and it's looking into Phil's fields and his land there. It's absolutely gorgeous, and I actually took my camera this morning. Maybe at the next meeting I can share some of the photos that I took because it's absolutely beautiful. And you can see onto that parcel from the road. I also want to say that people park we're at St. Paul's and walk down Wurtemberg Road, people who don't live in the neighborhood. So the public does enjoy Wurtemberg Road, and I'm sure they're walking on it because it's a beautiful road to walk on. One other thing is that Nate also came to my property, and although he did the same flag test, thanks for coming, and we did kind of establish that on the north end, I'm at 361, north end of my property, there are some points where you could see the corner of the northwest corner of the solar array. So, and one thing I had brought up in the past is that it's not just our homes that we live in that make our properties like why we love them. It's also because we can walk around our property and we know that there's farmland surrounding us. Like that's really, that's part of owning a home, and that's part of owning land. And so Saratoga says it's never contacted me, and I'm an adjacent landowner. I realize that it's maybe minimal from my home, but it's not necessarily, invisible from my property.
Yes?
Hi. At the start of your presentation, I think you said that you were here representing Hudson Solar. I just wondered what you meant by that.
I'm a consultant with Hudson Solar.
Could you just let us know who you are?
Sure. Chris McGrath, 329 Wurtemberg Road.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just got the impression throughout the presentation that you were more of an advocate for Hudson Solar. I thought we were supposed to be getting like an independent visual analysis.
He is a consultant to Hudson Solar, and the visual analysis given today is in response to the planning board having a workshop with our consultant, looking at what the previous submission had been and requesting further information, further work, further effort to try and determine whether or not the screening that's projected will be adequate.
Okay, so his goal of his analysis is to provide you with information or to advocate for the applicant?
Just to provide you some information. The professional groups, they have their own reputation. They certainly don't want to give false information.
Attorneys advocate.
Yeah, you have a Hudson Solar logo on the first page of your. It's just hard to see the separation between you and Hudson Solar. I could be ignorant to the process, but it seems like the board would want an independent visual analysis, not an analysis from somebody that was hand in hand with Hudson Solar.
Well, we did do that. We had George James analyze the original work, which he thought was actually quite well done, but he thought there were a few things that needed to still be addressed, which is what this is here tonight, trying to address those points that Mr. James presented to us at that workshop. And Mr. James was working for us, the planning board. Yes?
One other thing I have to say, did anybody look at, like, I know that there was like the environmental study, but there is like an enormous amount of Oriental bittersweet on that parcel, because I look right, you know, I'm adjacent to it. It's covered in Oriental bittersweet. It's strangling lots of the trees. I have a bunch of trees that are about to come down because of it. We just purchased our home, you know, at the end of last summer, so we're going to be tackling it this summer. But that parcel is covered in it. The whole area, it's a problem. So I just wondered if that was taken into consideration at all, or if it will be.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught the beginning of the meeting, we did expand our leased area to 7.8 acres now around the project site. So now our leased area is basically where this orange line is. So we will be in charge of the screening that we are adding, which I do believe, I remember doing that corner with you and looking into your property. I do believe, just as this wraps around the north corner and obstructs the view from Amanda's.
So the leased area, it's just basically around it.
Around it. So we are now maintaining the vegetation around this as well. So we can make sure that there's not going to be invasive species that's ruining the screening in this entire area.
Can you tell me what percentage of the property that is, 7.8 acres?
Do the math right
About
now.
half.
Yeah, it's about half.
About or less, or does it matter?
It's slightly less than half.
Other questions?
Oh, a question. Bill and Jenny Karate, this is an interesting question. They've shown us the plans for their house, which is a two-story modular that they obviously would put on the eastern portion of the meadow, the old farmland of the property that's actually shown in this picture. If they do that, it seems pretty obvious that they'd be looking right down into the solar array. Does that get consideration, or would there be consideration if there was a house put up for blockage at that point?
I think with consideration of that, I mean, at this point, obviously, it's not there, so it's a little difficult to make any hard and fast determinations. But I do believe during the review periods that are going to come up periodically, if there suddenly is a residence there, then that would be an issue that would have to be looked at.
So
And that could be made one of the conditions of approval, is that occupied residential, structures basically are screened from the array.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm curious to know what kind of angle that seems like an awfully tall structure to block the view from a second-story window adjacent to the property.
It could be at this point, without it being there, it'd be sort of foolish for me to say that it's going to be visible. I don't know. Yeah.
But just in line with that, shouldn't Phil's plans to build a two-story home factor into the special use permit, the language where it says, this, whatever the proposed project or uses can adversely impact, the appropriate development of adjacent lands?
That's never been part of you basically have to deal with what actually exists or what does exist. If someone is actually doing something on the property, has been doing something on the property, basically trying to deal with hypotheticals like that. It could be almost anything. Someone may want to put up some sort of a facility there, some sort of a group home, something along those lines.
So what does that phrase even mean then?
I'm sorry?
What does that phrase then in the law mean, like you can't adversely affect, the development of an adjacent property? Is it like you're saying it's something that's already in the process of being developed?
No, by saying that, you basically don't want to do anything that is going to harm the use of the other property for whatever different uses it might have. Now, since we don't know what a house is going to be like there, where it's going to be specifically sited, I don't think the site's been engineered yet. That will often tell where you're going to have it, where you can put in a well and a septic, things like that. So I doubt that he really knows where it's going to be allowed to be put in by the Dutchess County Health Department. We certainly don't know. But there's no reason why conditions can't be placed into any screening portion of a project that we approve, that it has to be revisited because areas do change. People do build houses, they add on to houses and things like that. Then at that point, you have something you can actually look at and actually try to deal with and address if there is some sort of lack of screening problem. Yes?
I just wanted to make sure, at the workshop meeting, we talked about visual analysis, and then you were also talking about where it also falls, if it's not in line with the character of the neighborhood, and you were kind of saying that everybody was kind of, I think, in agreement that the character of the neighborhood isn't only visual. Is that still something that will be addressed, further along the line?
Well, if you go into Rhinebeck, most neighborhoods do have historic structures, they do have historic significance. It's very difficult in this community to do much of anything if you're not going to be in an area which does have value and historic significance. I think, let's face it, we all use electricity, we all use the modern conveniences of the 21st century, things of that sort. We all, to some extent, have a responsibility for that. I do at the same time feel that it's important to do something, if you're going to do something like this, that in no way, I mean, how are you going to hurt the character of a community if you can't see something, if you can't hear it, if you can't, if it has no, let's say, radiation problems, anything like that. If there are no problems, if you don't know it's there, how does that negatively
Because
affect?
everybody who lives there knows that it's there.
And if someone buys a house or someone selling their home and someone's looking to buy it, they're gonna know it's there. And that's part of what, we've been saying. And one other thing, I'm sorry to correct the gentleman's name, he said, quote, "there's no substitute to going out and taking a look." And so I would encourage, if Saratoga wants to come back, to come to my property, and all of you are obviously welcome to come to my property to look at what my vantage point's gonna be like, and to see how special, obviously, like, I bought the house, so I think it's very special, but how special our property is and our driveway and the viewpoint from it, and how, limited visibility, so it will be somewhat visible, limited visibility, and we'll see what that means, is going to adversely affect my view, and it's gonna adversely affect, the character of the community, whether or not you can see it, hear it, taste it, smell it.
Well, if this thing does go in, and there is limited visibility that does impact you, at 1 year we can look into that. After 3 years, there are specific periods of time when we will look into it, and if the screening is not functioning, it is negatively impacting you, then it will have to be addressed. Yes?
I had also brought up that question. I was wondering if you ever got an answer, because the zoning administrator, she never got back. Larissa, she never got back. There was that email string. I'm still confused about the lot coverage and the surface area of the panels, and how that size, that amount of solar panel can go onto that parcel without, without exceeding the bulk surface area that's allowed on that size parcel.
That would have to be a question for her to answer. Technically, the planning board, that's not something we can say.
I just don't understand why I haven't gotten the answers that I asked. I mean,
I'd ask her again. I don't know. But that
but
is.
wouldn't that be something, because there was confusion when Ron was here about the use of that parcel, and I know that there was confusion because we were told something different than it actually was, and it conflicts with the lot coverage for that. And I calculated it, and I know that it doesn't make sense.
But that would definitely have to be a question for the zoning administrator. In other words, questions of that sort is not something that the planning board can answer. It's a question they have to answer. And we can give you a guess or leave a guesstimate, but there's no authority to that, there's no legal standing to that, because we're not authorized to answer that sort of question.
Okay.
I'll go see her and just check to see what kind of other uses. And I'm not sure if there was clarification on accessory use or primary use. You'd said that it's a primary use?
It would be the primary use, yes.
And then we'll look into what other, obviously it diminishes, if not removes the potential for accessory uses, and I'll get confirmation on that. I don't know if you have information or expectation on that, but I'll
At this
confirm
point, we
it.
haven't heard of any other use being proposed for the property. It's
Sorry, no.
possible they may use the barn for something, but other than that, there's no other construction, there's no other, nothing has been presented to us of any other use on the property.
Right, that's projected, but in terms of allowed usage, just based on the lot size, that already cuts out some use. The fact that it's taking up just less than half of the parcel size, that probably takes out some others, so we're, I'm assuming, interested in seeing what other potential uses there are, accessory uses are, and we'll get that information. I just didn't know if anybody had any specific information on that. Just
Basically, what you want to do is look at the use table and in the RC5 district. It would need at least 5 acres for any other use that's outside, let's say, the leased area, something like that, which is already the lease itself, that's that land up. So it would have to be outside that. And there are other restrictions often that some things require 10 acres, something like that, that wouldn't be allowed on something that's undersized. That's the best place to get that information. Anything else tonight?
yeah, is it public comment? I mean, not necessarily on the...
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Sure, you do.
I just have 3 comments.
I didn't know.
That was just a quick on 340 Rhinebeck. I just wanted to revisit, I had a bunch of notes, but one was, there was status on the request for a visual rendering of a ground perspective view of the solar array. That had been brought up a couple of times. I'm not sure if there was any status on that request.
I think my understanding was that was some of the views that they were developing there, showing the screening, both the computer generated as well as the actual using the photos, and that's basically what that was intended to do.
It was well, there was a minimal, I guess there was a minimal view in terms of the fencing, but not a visual perspective of, but I thought it was, last time it was 500 yards. It's a different shape, it's a smaller size now. But that actual visual representation would be different than several panels. I don't think that facilitated the request, but I'm not sure if there's any, if that ever went out.
Is the concern whether you see the whole thing from one spot, just see the whole thing from one side? I guess I don't quite
It gives a
understand.
better personal sense of scale of the project.
I think we can sort of get that from most of the plans we have, when something comes in and it shows, here's the land, here's the dimensions of the land, it's done to scale on the site plan. That's about how that's done.
But that's not a visual representation, that's a graphical one, or
Well, I'm not sure what, you just...
yeah, similar to the ones that we were seeing, but that fence line wasn't showing 500 yards of solar panels. What that would look like. You know, I guess it's just an expansion of what we put here.
You mean if there was no screening, what, 500 yards of solar panels?
Not even, yeah, not even, I guess, with and without the screening, just basically, I think I've seen it on the billboards, as a matter of fact. When we go on 9G, there's sort of a visual representation of what solar panels look like from a bird's eye view, as opposed to an aerial view or a satellite view.
Well, there were any number, first there were any number of views of that, that's what they look like, so I find it already exists, say, open fields and things like that. And is that what you're...
Not a generic view, an actual scale view of the specific size of the project.
From the air, is that what...
From a let's say, 20, 30 foot height or something like that. It's kind of a...
I guess the reason that wasn't looked at is because there is no 20 or 30 foot height that you would be able to access to see this.
No. Can anybody else contribute to this in terms of...
What he's talking about is getting something that you can see, that just setting aside the issue, correct me if I'm wrong, by the way, setting aside the issue of screening for a moment, that what Dave's inquiring about is just getting something that's going to show what the project is going to look like.
The scale of the project.
Do you see the difference between that?
Well, it is the dimensions.
A visual representation of that.
The problem with that, though, is that the whole discussion tonight is telling you that the surround, if you just had the solar panels, in 3D, which is what I think you're saying, right? You also need to have all the surround around it in 3D, and what we heard tonight is you're really not going to see it from all the vantage points, with the exception of the couple of things that were raised now, that the board is addressing by saying they will put safeguards in to make sure those things will be addressed. So I'm not really sure what the benefit is of just seeing a blank solar panel on grass.
Just for the record, can I have your name?
Oh, I'm sorry, Linda Christensen.
Thank you.
I guess probably a drone view would probably be another way of putting it. That's definitely... I do know that it was requested twice, but I'm just surprised that nothing specific had come from that request.
I think we've had multiple views and from all angles and up and down, and the only one we haven't had is from underneath.
Are you sure of the specific size?
I understand the magnitude of it by looking at the presentations that have been made and all the documentation that's come through here.
I didn't even mean to get very far onto this, but I don't feel that, and I'm not going to push it very far, I just don't feel that I've seen a specific, a photometry-like visual view of the scale of the project as at specific size. Do you know what photometry is? Not a radial view, it's an angled view as opposed to an aerial view. And it gives a sense of what it looks like, not from a satellite, but from a drone perspective, or from a small plane perspective.
I guess the thing that we were thinking is that who's ever going to see it from that perspective? Unless, if you're on an airplane, something like that. I have friends who are pilots, I know they fly. Nephews
But
are
not
pilot Marines,
but
but
not
so
at
I know
30
what
feet,
they
they're
see.
not.
A couple times it's pretty.
The drone might.
But that's the thing, we didn't see that as something anyone's going to see. That's something that's going to be that's going to impact anyone, realistically speaking. And so we've been trying very hard to cover every possible thing that we possibly could see, could hear, could in any way, shape, or form be detected. That's what we basically tried to concentrate on, and I do believe to a good extent that's what we've done.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I didn't mean to get off on that. That was just, it happened to be a request that wasn't, in my personal view, wasn't satisfying. I do some things, I just wanted to, it was been brought up before, the property that Barry Sherrod bought it used to be a trucking company, and there were 18-wheelers that would come down our street, which is a pretty country road, it's a smaller road. Actually, the trucks used to go between properties, between our neighbor's property, get up to 9G. And that was a usage that should never have happened. It was a trucking company in a residential neighborhood, probably a lack of zoning at the time. And so that's part of what had happened to this property. So when it was purchased, it is understandable that it could be seen for commercial use. And that's, I think, what we're all looking at now. And I just want to reinforce the fact that from a neighborhood perspective, it's different because it's, for us, it's a power generating facility that's not in keeping with the historic and scenic character of the neighborhood. And that's sort of where we see the tug of war or the issues, because looking at it at a somewhat myopic level, it matches the property as it was in use before. In the neighborhood, we're looking to restore it to the character of the community that we have. And so one of the actions that was taken was to begin working with the Conservation Advisory Board, or CAB, to designate Wurtemberg's historic core around St. Paul's Lutheran Church and to work with Wurtemberg Road as critical environmental areas, or CEAs. A presentation this Thursday that was done right here to the CAB was well received, and their opinion should be communicated shortly. This is just, one way or another, it's just important information for the planning board to have, and that's important in the decision-making process. There was, I don't have a presentation, but I do have a copy just for review here. I think I'll probably hand one into Gretchen for, sure. Just to scan through. I don't have more copies, just to see what was done. I can, present that to the board if desired. I will be sending a copy to Gretchen for documentation. Our own comprehensive plan not only highlights the historic resources of Wurtemberg, including the 4 buildings in the National Register, but also identifies Wurtemberg for its scenic character. And our comprehensive plan recommends Wurtemberg and the Wurtemberg Road as CEAs. But that's described in the presentation. So there's a historic center. This has been brought up several times, but it's important to see it from an aerial view. And I'm sorry I don't have a larger screen to post this at all, but I can show you. And I don't know if I'll hold it up, I guess, for the audience. That's the best I can do. John, you can go in if you want. Thank you. And that, what it shows is, it shows a core historic center to Wurtemberg, the Wurtemberg hamlet, that's basically anchored by St. Paul's Lutheran Church. And its parsonage and the cemeteries are all in the National Register. There are headstones dating back to 1710. And there's an adjacent cemetery that has all 12 generations of the people that lived in our house. And our house is the Bolt's farmhouse, which is at 340 Wurtemberg Road. And that has much of the original character of the 1700s building. It's also in the National and State Register. And there is an 18th century carriage barn across the road That's on the Karate property. And then if you go a little farther down across Frost Road, you come to Frostlands. This was Samuel Frost and Benson and Barbara Frost, which are notable in the community. Their Frost Fund gives money to projects for Rhinebeck. And there are 1850s Dutch barns on the property as well. They're quite beautiful. Next to them, abutting them and across, is the John H. Traver farmhouse, which is also on the National and State Register. It has a spectacular blue Palatine barn there, you can see as you walk along. Max Nimitz, who owns the property, has also bought the open fields just north of that, across from the church, to preserve, to make sure there's not going to be a gas station on there. So what we see, besides, this is just the historic center. The presentation highlights both the sort of the historic core of Württemberg, and it also highlights the road. It goes to show how many farmhouses are along there. What had happened long ago in the Palatine days is they created these north-south roads, such as Route 9, what was before Old Post Road, what became Old Post Road, and the farm road that connected these Palatine farms was Württemberg Road. And in the WPA times, Roosevelt came in and made 9G, and it orphaned Württemberg Road, and all these farmhouses, all the way from Green Acres Farm to Buttonwood, all the way down to the Marquardt Farmhouse, 2.5 miles, still has the historic farmhouses, there's historic homes, B&Bs, farmhouses, barns, horse farms, open fields, and ponds, and they're all highlighted in the presentation, and certainly I can give the presentation if desired. But the key is that, I'll send a copy of that presentation over. We're working with the CAB. The CAB will go to the town, and it will be up for consideration as a CEA. They're finally beginning the process, but it's very important that the comprehensive plan highlights this. We see a core historic center, spoken with the neighbors, and everybody loves the road. And just to show, this is where the planned solar plant is, and it's just something that should be considered in the decision-making process. And it is because it is the first time, this is a standard for what Rhinebeck perceives as appropriate use, and it should get fair consideration. And appreciate the visual consideration and also the limitation to 2.5 acres. So definitely, my wife and I respect the considerations, several of the considerations that were put into the solar law. These are important, and they are things that we understand are different for Rhinebeck. I do have to say, in closing, that I've compared solar laws. I've pulled them from general code for many different places, and there is, obviously there are very good things to the solar law. I'm not going to comment anything on how the law was created, but there are some things that have been seen in the solar law comparisons that I've seen. One is a leaning towards industrial districts and business parks. That's not fully, but there are places like Newport that focus on that. Brookings now where I'm from. There's a clear leaning away from residential areas, and one of the conflicts here, I think, is that it's easy to see this as open space, but not as a neighborhood, and we do see it as a neighborhood. And also, there are considerations for historic character in several of the solar laws, including, it says, for example, historic and/or culturally significant resources in a historic district or historic district transition zone. This is not a historic district such as Rhinebeck or others, but it does show consideration for historic character. So those are some of the key points I wanted to make, and certainly any more information on the presentation or information on what we perceive Württemberg as being we'd be willing to share.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
And Gretchen, I think you can just grab the copy of the presentation. Thank you.
Cheryl Griffith from Red Hook. I just want to make a comment about the historic rural character of that neighborhood. From about 1972 to about 1995, I drove very often past that area. And when I first started driving down there, it was all open woods and open fields with active farms. And over that time period, it became dotted with houses. A lot of the farms went away. I believe that a lot of the properties around there, a lot of the residences have been built since 1972. So it's still a very beautiful area, and I think that it's very commendable that it be protected as far as it is now. But I just want to point out that it's not the historic rural landscape that it used to be. And from my point of view, with all the consideration that's put into screening this, it's going to have less of an impact on the historic rural character than some of the residential development that's gone on in that time. So I think that it's just going to be hidden away. And won't, I mean, you'll know it's there, but you don't see it.
I invite you to look at the presentation. I can do the presentation for you. And we live in a building from 1745, and that's historic.
Oh, yeah, there are several historic places there, I know, but there are also many that are not historic.
That's true.
As is the case with the entire town.
That's
So I just have a few brief comments. Ms. Jewell. So one about the other uses for this property. I know that some people have come here and said they're saving us from a cell tower, they're saving us from all sorts of not good uses. However, a cell tower cannot be put on this property because of the co-location requirement, and actually the cell tower law specifically says it favors siting on a main road, which Wurtemberg Road is not. Someone brought up a children's camp or an adult day camp. Minimum acres needed for that is 50. I swear someone brought up a golf course. Minimum acres needed for that is 110. Rod and gun club, minimum acres 150. Sawmill, minimum acres 25. Contractor's yard, and this highlights also a different issue. So the contractor's yard is only permitted on a lot which is the actual residence of the owner of such business, and Barry Sherrod does not live here. Country Inn 1, minimum acres needed 20. And at not the last meeting, which was the workshop, the meeting before that, someone from Hudson Solar said that our neighborhood wasn't actually residential because there's a church on it, on the road. However, again, unlike Barry, the pastor and his wife, since they got to the church, live in the parsonage. The innkeepers live in the inn. We all live on this road, and the one person that doesn't live there wants to put this use that 107 other people find completely inappropriate from the road. And with all due respect to the woman from Red Hook, you know, Barry, the woman from Red Hook, they're not driving past us every day and they don't have to live with it. And we do, and we hope that you will take our feelings and opinions into consideration and give them more weight than someone from Red Hook, or then I saw some student from Poughkeepsie wrote a letter. All of these people that don't live here and don't own property in the town of Rhinebeck. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
I have actually several questions. Was any part of the study done to look at possible glare from the panels at low sun to the southeast to southwest, or directly east, directly west?
Glare's been brought up a few times. We've done glare analysis on it. Part of the NYSERDA document that I passed out to all of you included glare analysis as well. Glare has been thoroughly debugged as something to be concerned about with solar. I mean, they install it at airports now. They install it all over the place. It has about the glare of vegetation and dirt is the reality. It's designed to absorb light. It's not designed to reflect light.
Well, it's a glass covering, and at a certain angle, you get total internal reflection.
It's a treated glass covering, though. It's treated to allow light to absorb, not to reflect. That's the whole purpose, is to absorb solar light.
I've seen panels that, you know, at the proper sun angle, you can get a lot of glare off of them.
Based on the angle that these panels are at, It'll, based on the angle that these panels are at, it'll reflect pretty much directly back up into the air. It's not gonna reflect.
Well, the panels are at about 22 degrees, and at low sun conditions on, either sunrise, sunset, it looks to me like you could get some reflections up onto Mountain View Road. Was that looked at all?
I mean, we had looked at Mountain View Road. Mountain View Road has no visual impact on this project at all.
Well, it's in the purple part of your analysis.
Oh, glad you asked that question. I did look at Mountain View Road. I went up and drove Mountain View Road just the other day. This is a location from Mountain View Road that the bare earth view shed shows as being visibility. And again, what the bare earth view shed means is that if all trees, all vegetation did not exist, there would be a potential for a line of sight to the project. And in looking at the view shed map, most of Mountain View Road is not in the bare earth. And looking at the condition that causes that, there's actually a low ridge line that falls between Mountain View Road and the project site. There are two locations on Mountain View Road where, if there were no vegetation, a line of sight might exist. I went to both locations. The first one, the topographic database I used, which I mentioned is a regional scale database. It's not surveyed to be actually topographically accurate to the point of picking up every nuance of landscape. So one of the locations, if you go to that area and drive, you'll actually see a roadside hill right in front of you that blocks the view. So that's the bare earth view shed in that area is a false positive. In the second area,
We're just talking from that road. What about from properties on that?
That hill has houses on it, that's what you're talking about.
well, obviously it's not practical to go to every house within a particular radius. It's just not feasible as a visual analyst. Well, that's why the view shed maps are done. They give you areas where
it is the road. The road has a hill that goes up, that blocks, that's where the houses are, that blocks the view down. So
the view shed analysis is done to address that issue exactly, to tell you where off of the roads you might exist. So visual analysts cannot possibly look at every condition, but what we do is look at the visual analysis, the view shed map for bare earth, then we overlay forest on it, and that forest generally will take care of 90% or more of that bare earth visibility. And then you can look at aerial photographs and things of that sort and interpret whether a view is likely. From Mountain View Road, I can guarantee you there will be no visibility. If somebody can show me a view from their home where they have a distant view, remember that the project is more than a mile from Mountain View Road at its nearest point. So if somebody can stand in their yard or from their upper story and look in that direction and see the orange roofs that are down there, they may have a view.
But that seems to be the purpose of the visual study.
Not to study every inch of the view shed, but you incrementally look at it. The view shed map pares it down. What the view shed map shows very clearly is there's no visibility from Mountain View Road.
People in homes, not for roads, and the roads, the properties are pretty sizable, and they go uphill, and then from the top of the road, they look down.
Is there a particular property you're referencing on Mountain View Road, or you're speculating that somebody might?
There's Ashworth, and there's Samantha Guthrie, and Savannah Guthrie, and Abe Ashworth, even Isaac Ashworth. They're both just beyond that, around the curve. It goes uphill, the driveways go up, and at the top of the hill, of course you're not going to see from the road, but at the top of the hill, those houses will be looking down.
Do you know there's a view, or are you speculating?
Sorry, I'm speculating.
Whether there's a view from those properties?
I'm speculating that there's more of a view there than from a road with a hill in front of it. And that
Okay,
people in
I
houses
would reference you to the view shed map, and if there's an area of visibility in that location, then that might be a place to study. But simply speculating because something is high and therefore will have a view is really a...
Well, I'm just pointing out that a look from the road is useless.
Did your all of the visual analysis analysis that you did it rely on any area that's outside of the leased portion? So was any of the screening that you're showing us in these outside of the leased portion?
It includes all existing vegetation, yes.
So it includes vegetation that is outside the area that they're leasing. So it includes vegetation that Hudson Solar, if they go through this project with that size site, will not have control over.
You would have to, again, speculate that vegetation on a regional scale would be removed to the point that it would alter the results of the visual assessment. The vast majority of the screening is caused by vegetation on site, but I cannot
But when I
definitively
look
tell
at
you.
that, I see a lot of trees and they are not within the leased portion. And that's like a big concern to me as an adjacent
As we
landowner.
pointed out, we are going to put a condition in if this were to be approved, that in 1 year, the screening has to be assessed to see whether or not it's effective. At 3 years, the law requires it, and every 5 years thereafter.
But it seems unfair that right now they're able to rely on vegetation that's outside the leased area. They're not in control of that area. That to me doesn't make any sense.
Honestly, it makes complete sense because
Well, then
that's the condition of every structure that's built
Should it-
anywhere,
but-
is that if you remove vegetation out of that property owner's control, that structure may potentially become visible. That's an impossible situation to evaluate and mitigate for. It just is.
But in a situation like this, Hudson Solar could lease that entire portion of land and that would be taken care of. And every adjacent landowner is concerned about seeing this, so I don't understand why the whole parcel wouldn't be leased if all the screening is in that parcel. I don't understand that.
It seems that we're going to have to take a look at exactly what the lease does and what the vegetation within the leased area, projected leased area is, what it consists of, to what extent it is effective. People outside the property that Mr. Sherrod owns choose to take down vegetation, that's their decision.
I'm sorry, not under the whole parcel, I'm talking about the leased area.
That's what, I think it's around 8 acres now, that's what's being proposed, and that's what we're looking at. That's what's proposed, that isn't necessarily what it's going to end up being.
Yeah, but I'm just pointing out that this visual analysis relies on vegetation, which is on the parcel, but which is not within the leased area still. Yes, they expanded the leased area, but it still doesn't include all the vegetation that this visual analysis is relying on when it could, and then this would be more accurate.
Well, to what extent we need to expand that leased area, we can look at that and see exactly what the different vegetation is outside of the existing leased area, that it actually does have an impact on the screening effect. Some of it may not be effective. If you're talking about different sort of things like, let's say the different vines and things like that, or pulling things down, things of that sort, the multiflora rows, things of that sort, that's probably not going to be effective anyway. And they're aware of this, it's not the size that's going to be effective at screening something 7.5 or 8 feet tall.
Yeah, it just seems like if they were in control of it, they could deal with it more immediately, I don't know.
I'm going to ask a question. If all your neighbors were neighbors and this project went in and you had a concern, did you ever think about going to the applicant and saying, hey, we have this problem, can we fix it together? All I hear is, we did.
Well,
You're in the
Hudson
city.
Solar never came to my door and knocked and told me that they were going to.
Well, they didn't come to my door either. So, go to their door.
They weren't being a very friendly neighbor, very sure I was at one of these meetings.
I think at this point, I think we probably pretty well discussed, we discussed
We've
tonight.
exhausted it.
This public hearing is going to be
I was in the middle of asking a
continued.
question, I'd like to finish. I was in the middle of asking about.
Okay, just a moment, and you can. We are going to continue the public hearing to June 4th, so that you have a chance to actually look at the information beyond just this review tonight, and take a look at exactly what it entails and what it looks at, and what might still be problematic for you. You just saw it tonight, so it's kind of probably unfair to expect you to make any snap judgments, this is good, this is bad, or whatever. So this gives you about another month to actually look over this different information and consider what else you might think needs to be done, and what other concerns that you have.
Yeah, the reason I asked about glare is, I mean, you're showing a picture here with leaves on the trees, but if it was, you say with the purple areas were for bare ground, but in the wintertime, the vegetation doesn't offer much, and at low sun angles, if you got light source coming through that vegetation, it's going to be a lot more visible than just a blank or black, solar panel. So that's why I was very curious about the glare angle at those points. So it would really be good to make sure that that isn't a condition anywhere on it. And you probably know at a certain low angle, all the light reflects off the glass, regardless of whether it's covering a solar panel or not, and no matter how absorptive that solar panel is. At a certain angle, you're going to get almost all of that light is going to come up and bounce up into wherever that happens to be. And the other questions I had was, you're suggesting, I don't know who's suggesting, but white pines were suggested as what they were planning to cover that. Well, white pines they're sort of notorious for losing their lower branches after a while. Is there any secondary trees that are going to be used to fill in where those branches come off?
Do you want to answer that?
So there will be forsythia planted along the entire southern border as well as the entire northwest corner. That's pretty much where that screening is being added, so that is being put around the perimeter of the array as well.
Okay.
And it'll provide that dense understory.
And that'll go up to about 4 or 5 feet?
We'll let it grow as much as it can grow.
Okay. And the other question is, you mentioned was made of successional vegetation. Is there any guarantee to keep that in a frozen state of succession, or is that succession going to continue on and those trees are no longer going to be effective for screening?
Which trees are you
Well, specifically the cedars and the dogwoods. I mean, they're doing a pretty good screening job right now, but they won't stay that way if the little oaks come in and shade them out, and then you're going to get oak trunks where there used to be a full cedar tree.
And I think that's all part of the schedule to go back out every 5 years or so and analyze that. Yes, we're going to do our best to
So you're going to
make sure
maintain the
everything is
screening
green.
no matter what?
Yes, yeah, in that leased area, which is why we expanded the leased area to include more of that vegetation so we could have some control over it.
I see.
But the process to come out every 5 years will also, to me, handle any of those concerns.
And also, is a lot of talk is mostly covered, pretty much covered. What's the problem with 100% blocking of this array?
What's the problem with it?
Yes.
I mean, you could basically have any one of these, at least on the 43 Frost Road, which is to me the one that has the biggest impact. At this point in time, you can barely see anything through there. I don't see how 100% is going to matter much compared to 96%. I don't see how that's going to be a big deal. You're not going to see much.
It seems like you don't have to put in much to do that 4% then.
Well, when you're talking about a second floor window, yeah. Because as you rise in elevation and you're looking down at the project, you're asking for more and more and more to be done to mitigate that. What we've added to deal with that second floor window, to me, more than screens what's necessary to see that array. Yes, there is some filtered through, but there's just as much filtered through to see other houses and things like that. What you're seeing in that array is so very minimal. And again, we've looked at this extensively at a leaf-off condition. We have never seen this looked at on a leaf-on condition. So we're looking at it always on the worst-case scenario with screening added.
We started out this discussion months ago with talking about berms and fences. Are they no longer considered something that would mitigate this at all?
I mean, we can look at other things, but to me, the berm was thrown out almost at the advice of the planning board. It would have required a lot more to be done. It would have required some excavation. We're trying to not disturb the ground here. We're trying to be as minimal as we can. And we put that, it was in plans a while back and it got removed.
Okay, at this point, could I hear a motion to continue the public hearing to June 4th, for this June 4th, at which time we will pick this back up again and hopefully be able to come to some conclusions at that point. Second?
We don't know.
We don't know
We're
yet, we
looking
have
at
to
June
see what we
4th.
already have on the list. Second? Anybody?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Very good.
Can I also just say that next meeting, everybody, any conversation, please come up to the microphone, state your name, your address, so it's in the record, and also when he's videoing, he's trying to get you in the, all together, and he can't. He needs to have you each individually up there.
Okay, thank you.